Elon Musk was standing outside a coffee shop in downtown Los Angeles, the early morning sunlight casting a golden hue over the bustling city. His mind was preoccupied with the latest plans for SpaceX, Tesla's next big breakthrough, and of course, his ongoing work on the Hyperloop. The world seemed to revolve around him, and every minute felt like a race to keep up with his never-ending ambitions. Yet, for all the wealth, influence, and fame, there were moments when Elon felt a peculiar emptiness, a sense of disconnection from the world around him. As he stepped away from the coffee shop and onto the busy sidewalk, he barely noticed the man sitting in the corner. It was the same busy street he'd walked down countless times, but something about this moment felt different. The homeless man was curled up on the ground, his face weathered and tired, his clothes ragged. A cardboard sign lay next to him, the words written in thick, shaky black marker. "I just need someone to care." Elon stopped. The sign was simple, yet it hit him harder than he expected. His gaze lingered on the man. He couldn't have been much older than 50, though his face made him look decades older. His unkempt beard and the dirt streaked across his face only added to the sense of despair that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. Elon's instinct was to keep walking. He was late for a meeting, and in the high-speed, high-stakes world he lived in, moments like this were rare. But something about the man's eyes, dull but searching, stopped him. There was no begging in his expression, no outstretched hand demanding help, just a quiet vulnerability that seemed out of place amidst the noise of the city. Without thinking, Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. He knelt down and handed them to the man, who looked up at him with surprise. "Here you go," Elon said, his voice soft but steady. The man blinked, taking the money but not immediately reacting. He looked back up at Elon, as if trying to read something in his face. "You don't know me," the man said after a moment, his voice low and raspy. "But thank you." Elon nodded and began to turn away, but something held him there. The brief interaction felt far more significant than it should have, like a question had been planted in his mind that he didn't know how to answer. Before he could leave, the man's voice caught him again. "Do you think anyone would care if I disappeared?" Elon froze. The question was simple, yet it felt like it pierced straight through him. He turned back to the man, his mind racing for words, for something meaningful to say. I think everyone matters," Elon replied after a long pause. "But it's easy to forget sometimes. People get busy, caught up in their own lives." The man didn't say anything else. He just nodded, almost as if accepting the statement, and then fell silent again, his head lowering slightly, as though in resignation. Elon's heart ached, and for a brief moment, he saw not just the homeless man, but himself, someone constantly driven by the need to do more, to push forward, to reach new heights. Yet, in all his success, he sometimes felt like he was drifting further away from the things that truly mattered. As he walked away, a thought kept lingering in his mind. What if I could do more than just give him a few dollars? It was a thought that would haunt him for the next few days, growing steadily louder, more insistent. What if the problem wasn't that people didn't care, but that they didn't know how to? What if the answer wasn't just money or food, but something deeper? What would you do if you were in Elon's shoes? Would you stop and help, or keep walking? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. After that brief encounter on the streets of Los Angeles, Elon Musk couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within him. He wasn't the type of man who often dwelled on personal interactions. His life had always been about the next breakthrough, the next challenge, the next frontier. But as the days went by, he found himself thinking about the homeless man more and more. He didn't even know his name, but that simple question, "Would anyone care if I disappeared?" had been haunting him like an itch he couldn't scratch. Elon had built empires. He had sent rockets into space, revolutionized electric cars, and even had a hand in shaping the future of public transportation. His name was synonymous with innovation, a symbol of the future. People admired him, followed him on social media, and waited eagerly for his next big idea. Yet, for all his accomplishments, there was a quiet loneliness that lingered in his life. He had grown up in South Africa, an outsider in a world that never quite felt like it belonged to him. His childhood was marked by an intense curiosity, an obsession with technology, and a deep sense of not fitting in. His parents, a Canadian mother and a South African father, had an unconventional relationship, one that Elon often felt pulled in two directions. His father was an engineer, his mother a model and dietitian, but neither of them fully understood Elon's restless, brilliant mind. At a young age, he dove into books, teaching himself computer programming and engineering. It was clear that his future was not bound by the ordinary world of his peers. In his 20s, Elon had moved to the United States, first to study at the University of Pennsylvania, then to Stanford for graduate school. He had no intention of staying in academia. The world was already on the brink of an internet revolution, and Elon felt the magnetic pull of Silicon Valley. Within a few short years, he'd co-founded Zip2, sold it for millions, and gone on to create X.com, which would eventually become PayPal. Each success was followed by a bigger, more ambitious leap. But for all his accolades, Elon found himself disconnected from the day-to-day experiences of regular people. The world of billion-dollar valuations, high-profile investments, and high-speed ventures had slowly cut him off from the lives of the everyday person. Elon's success had come at a cost. His first marriage to Justine Musk ended after several years, and despite their shared bond over their children, there were moments where the weight of their different worlds seemed too much to bear. His second marriage to Tallulah Riley had ended similarly, an on-and-off relationship that struggled to survive against the backdrop of his relentless work ethic and intense focus on his companies. The more he achieved, the more distant his personal relationships became. At the same time, Elon's work consumed him. SpaceX's launches, Tesla's innovations, his ambitions for Mars, all of them demanded every ounce of his energy. He was constantly moving forward, but the connections that once seemed important, family, friends, even himself, had become distant memories. But that man on the street, David, that was different. His question hadn't just sparked a fleeting moment of compassion. It had hit a deeper, more profound chord inside Elon. What if, for all his success, he had lost sight of the human connections that made life truly meaningful? In the quiet of his office at SpaceX, Elon couldn't focus on work. His mind kept drifting back to David's face, those eyes full of silent pain. The man had asked for so little, and yet, it felt like Elon was being asked to give something much bigger, something he wasn't sure he had the answer to. "Maybe I'm not doing enough," Elon whispered to himself as he stared out the window at the sprawling city below. For all his grand ambitions, all the technologies he had created, what had he done to help those who were truly in need? He had poured money into scientific advancements and green energy, but had he ever truly focused on the people who lived right outside his own door? Elon leaned back in his chair, a deep sigh escaping his lips. There was an overwhelming sense of guilt settling into his chest. The world he inhabited, the fast-paced world of tech moguls and visionary entrepreneurs, felt so far removed from the struggles of people like David. And yet, somewhere deep down, Elon knew that this was where he could make a real difference. It wasn't just about writing a check to a charity or donating to a cause. It wasn't even about how much money he had or how many resources he controlled. It was about something more fundamental, human connection. David wasn't asking for wealth. He wasn't begging for fame. He just wanted someone to see him, to acknowledge his pain, and to help him find a way out. And maybe, just maybe, Elon Musk could be that someone. "I need to do more," Elon murmured to himself, a sense of clarity beginning to form. He had always believed that technology could change the world, but now he realized that the real change started with people. Real, imperfect, hurting people who just needed a chance to rise again. He stood up from his desk and walked over to the window, looking out over the vast expanse of Los Angeles. The city buzzed with activity, thousands of lives intersecting at every moment, but in many ways, disconnected. But Elon's mind was no longer on rockets or electric cars. It was on a homeless man sitting on a sidewalk, whose simple question had turned his world upside down. "I can't let this go," Elon thought, determination rising within him. "There has to be something I can do." For the next few days, Elon Musk couldn't stop thinking about the homeless man on that street corner. His mind wandered constantly back to David, the man who had asked if anyone would care if he disappeared. Those words had clung to him, echoing in the quiet moments between meetings and late-night work sessions. Every time he tried to focus on the next big idea or breakthrough, the image of David's tired, yet hopeful, eyes returned. Elon was a man of action. He was used to moving fast, making decisions, and taking risks. But this was different. This wasn't about rockets, cars, or software. This was about a human being, someone who, just a few days ago, was a stranger. And now, it felt as though he had an unspoken responsibility to help. The question that had been plaguing him since that moment lingered like a cloud over his thoughts. What can I do? At first, it seemed simple. A donation. A few $100s to help David get on his feet. Elon could easily write a check, or even better, give David cash directly. The practical side of him saw that as the easy answer. A quick fix that wouldn't take much time or effort. But the more Elon thought about it, the more he realized that a quick donation wasn't the solution. Elon wasn't naive. He knew that homelessness wasn't a problem that could be solved with a simple handout. He knew it was much deeper than that. A web of issues related to mental health, addiction, lack of opportunity, and systemic failures. A donation might help David get by for a few days or weeks, but it wouldn't solve the root of his problems. It hit Elon that this wasn't just about helping one person. It was about finding a way to make a real, lasting impact. He had seen firsthand how innovation could change industries, how technology could drive change on a massive scale. But could his resources, his influence, and his ideas be applied to something as human and complex as homelessness? For a man who had built entire companies from the ground up, who had revolutionized industries, this question was both maddening and humbling. Could he, with all his wealth and power, solve something as deep-rooted as this? Could he find a way to help not just David, but thousands of others who were struggling on the streets? Elon spent the next few days reflecting, talking to trusted advisors, and even reaching out to some of the experts he knew who worked with homelessness and mental health. Every conversation left him with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. The problem was far more complex than he had imagined. He met with several nonprofit organizations that focused on homelessness. They explained the cycles of poverty and addiction, the lack of support systems, and the overwhelming challenges that individuals like David faced. But each solution, while well-meaning, seemed fragmented, a short-term fix, a band-aid over a much deeper wound. It struck Elon that there had to be a way to apply the same innovative thinking he had used to create Tesla and SpaceX to this very human issue. But how? His mind raced with ideas, some grand, others more practical. What if he could create an entire ecosystem of support, similar to the models he had built for his companies? A system where people didn't just get help for a day or two, but were given the tools to rebuild their lives from the ground up. What if he could provide not just temporary housing, but long-term solutions like job training, mental health counseling, and addiction support? Yet, with every idea, the reality of the situation set in. Such a project would be enormous. It would require collaboration with governments, nonprofits, and community organizations. There were logistical challenges, financial obstacles, and bureaucratic hurdles that would need to be overcome. And it wasn't like Elon could just throw money at the problem and expect it to go away. This would require more than just resources. It would demand time, patience, and most importantly, a willingness to confront the deeply entrenched issues that had caused homelessness in the first place. As much as Elon wanted to make a difference, he couldn't help but feel a sense of overwhelm. He had always thrived in environments where he could push the limits of technology and innovation, where his vision for the future could become a reality. But this wasn't like building a rocket or designing an electric car. This was messy. This was human. This was about lives, about dignity, about finding a way to help people who had fallen through the cracks of society. Could he do it? Could he really make a lasting change in a system that had been failing for so long? The doubt crept in. Elon wasn't afraid of failure. He had faced it many times before. But this felt different. If he committed to helping David and others like him, he was stepping into a world he didn't fully understand. And that scared him. But then again, maybe that fear was exactly what he needed. Elon was no stranger to stepping into the unknown. He had done it time and time again with SpaceX, Tesla, and Neuralink. He had never been afraid of tackling the seemingly impossible. And this This was an opportunity to do something truly meaningful. Elon sat back in his chair and let out a slow breath. The decision wasn't easy, but it was becoming clearer. He couldn't just walk away from this. If there was a way to help, not just with money, but with real, transformative change, then he had to take it. He could no longer sit back and simply acknowledge the problem. He had to do something about it. And so, with that decision made, Elon began to map out a plan. The real work was about to begin. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, calls, and brainstorming sessions as Elon Musk dove headfirst into the problem of homelessness. For a man who had revolutionized entire industries, the sheer complexity of the issue hit him like a brick wall. It wasn't that he didn't understand the gravity of the situation. It was the overwhelming realization that the solutions he had applied to his other ventures just wouldn't work here. This wasn't about building a product that could be sold for billions. It was about creating a systemic change that could offer dignity, opportunity, and hope to people who had been forgotten by society. Elon's first step was to take a deep dive into the root causes of homelessness. He spent hours researching, speaking with experts in social services, addiction recovery, and mental health. He spoke with city planners, nonprofit leaders, and advocates for the homeless. Everyone agreed that the issues were vast and interconnected. The lack of affordable housing, the mental health crisis, the absence of support systems for people suffering from addiction, and the long-term effects of poverty. One thing became clear. The current system was not equipped to address the scale of the problem. Shelters were overcrowded, resources were stretched thin, and many of the existing programs were fragmented and inefficient. The solutions in place were band-aids, temporary fixes to a deep, systemic issue. But Elon wasn't interested in temporary. He wanted to create something lasting, something transformative. He began to think about how he could apply his experience in building complex, high-functioning systems to a cause that truly mattered. At Tesla, SpaceX, and his other ventures, Elon had always sought to solve big problems by creating new frameworks that didn't just patch existing issues but address them at the root. Could he do the same for homelessness? Elon's initial vision was bold. He imagined creating entire self-sustaining communities, places where people who had experienced homelessness could live, work, and heal. These communities would offer not just shelter, but education, job training, mental health services, and addiction recovery programs. They would be designed with the same level of precision and innovation that went into his technology companies, efficient, forward-thinking, and scalable. But even Elon knew that he couldn't solve this on his own. He needed to bring in experts, partners, and most importantly, the people who were directly impacted by homelessness. He reached out to urban planners, architects, and social service organizations to begin crafting a blueprint for what these communities could look like. The goal wasn't to create isolated shelters but integrated, thriving ecosystems where people could regain their independence and dignity. He also wanted to build something sustainable. Elon was determined to create communities that would be self-sufficient, not dependent on government funding or charity. The idea was to create a model that could be replicated in cities across the country and eventually the world. But just as things began to take shape, reality hit hard. One of the first hurdles Elon encountered was the sheer scale of what he was attempting. The cost of building such a network of communities was staggering. Land acquisition, infrastructure, medical and mental health services, job training. It would require billions of dollars. Even more challenging, though, was the need to work with local governments, which often had competing interests, budgets, and priorities. Cities like Los Angeles, where the problem of homelessness was most visible, had been trying for years to address the issue, but the solutions had been slow and ineffective. Elon's team met with local officials and city planners to discuss his vision. While the idea of creating a new type of community was met with interest, there was significant pushback on the execution. Some questioned whether it was even possible to create self-sustaining communities on such a large scale. Others raised concerns about the logistical challenges, finding land, integrating social services, and ensuring that the program was truly sustainable. But Elon didn't back down. He wasn't used to hearing no, and when he did, it only fueled his determination. He had faced far greater challenges in his career. The early days of SpaceX and Tesla, when both companies were on the brink of collapse. He had stared down failure before and emerged stronger. If he could do it then, Why not now? Determined to make his vision a reality, Elon set to work securing partnerships with nonprofit organizations, mental health professionals, and government agencies. He also focused on building relationships with key stakeholders in the tech industry to provide technological support for these communities. He imagined using everything from solar power to AI-driven healthcare solutions to make these communities both sustainable and innovative. His goal was to make them a model for the future, a future where technology and compassion intersected. But even as the wheels of change began to turn, Elon couldn't shake the memory of that day on the sidewalk. David's face, tired and worn, continued to linger in his mind. Elon knew that while his grand vision was important, he couldn't forget that this all started with a single person, a single life. David's plight was a reminder of the urgency of the problem, and the stakes were personal now. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings, Elon found himself back in Los Angeles, standing in the same spot where he had met David. He didn't expect to see the man again. The streets were constantly changing, and homelessness was an issue that moved through the city like a silent tide. But as he walked down the sidewalk, something caught his eye. There, sitting near the same corner where he had left him weeks ago, was David. His appearance had changed. His beard was shorter, his clothes cleaner, and he looked healthier, though still weary. But his eyes, those same tired eyes, met Elon's with a mixture of surprise and something else, maybe hope. David saw Elon approach, and his face broke into a tentative smile. "Hey, you. I remember you." Elon smiled back, a sense of warmth flooding through him. "I remember you too, David. How have you been?" David hesitated for a moment before answering. "Better. I got into a shelter for a while. They've been helping me get back on my feet. I've got a job now, working at a restaurant." He paused, looking up at Elon. "I never thought I'd get to this point, but I'm starting to believe maybe I can turn things around." Elon felt a lump in his throat. David wasn't just another person he had helped with a donation. He was a reminder that real change was possible. Elon was helping David, and maybe, just maybe, his bigger vision for the future could help many others, too. "I'm glad to hear that, David," Elon said. "I've been working on something big, and I think it could help a lot of people like you." David raised an eyebrow. "Really? You mean there's more to this than just giving me a few bucks?" Elon chuckled. "Much more than that. We're going to try and change the way things work, to give people like you not just a second chance, but a real shot at a better life." David's eyes widened. For the first time since they'd met, there was a flicker of hope in them, a spark of possibility. Elon Musk had always been a visionary, someone whose ambition stretched far beyond the ordinary. He had revolutionized industries, launched rockets into space, and transformed electric vehicles from an obscure concept into a global movement. But what he was about to embark on now was different. It wasn't about creating something for the future of technology, but for the future of humanity itself. As Elon sat across from David, he could feel the weight of his decisions settling in. This was no longer just about a grand idea or a potential business opportunity. This was about people, real, living, breathing people who were struggling in ways that had nothing to do with technology, but everything to do with society's failures. David's face was full of cautious optimism. It was clear that the idea of an entire ecosystem designed to lift people out of homelessness had piqued his interest. The glint of hope in his eyes was contagious, and for the first time, Elon felt as though he might actually be onto something that could make a real difference. Over the next few weeks, Elon poured his energy into turning his idea into a reality. His team at Tesla, SpaceX, and the Boring Company were all involved in one way or another, but this project wasn't about tech companies and cutting-edge advancements. It was about creating a supportive, nurturing environment where people could rebuild their lives. Elon had always been a hands-on leader, but this time, he was fully immersed in the social aspect of the project. He worked with social scientists, urban planners, and architects who specialized in creating communities that fostered inclusion and growth. He consulted with mental health experts and addiction counselors to ensure that the ecosystem would offer more than just housing, but the full spectrum of support needed for individuals to get back on their feet. He wanted to create a holistic approach to homelessness, one that addressed not just physical shelter but the emotional, psychological, and social challenges that accompanied it. The vision was bold. Elon imagined creating self-sustaining communities, designed with the same forward-thinking mindset that had guided his ventures into space and electric cars. These communities would provide people with not just a place to live, but a place to grow, to heal, and to thrive. There would be education programs, job training, healthcare services, and even spaces for people to build relationships and a sense of belonging. He envisioned green, eco-friendly housing with solar panels, water recycling systems, and energy-efficient designs that would not only support the environment but also teach residents about sustainability. The idea was that these communities wouldn't just be a refuge. They would be places where individuals could find purpose and regain their sense of autonomy. But even with all the planning, Elon knew that it wouldn't be easy. The first obstacle was always the same: money. While Elon had billions at his disposal, he knew that building something on this scale would require much more than just a few philanthropic donations. This was a multi-billion-dollar initiative, one that would require investors, long-term commitment, and most importantly, buy-in from the cities and local governments that would host these communities. Elon wasn't discouraged. He had faced challenges like this before. In fact, he had a long history of betting on long-term investments that many thought were too risky. Tesla had nearly collapsed more times than he cared to count, but now it was the leader in the electric car revolution. SpaceX had been written off by many as an impossible dream, yet it was now the company responsible for making space travel a reality. Elon knew that with the right strategy, the right partnerships, and enough determination, he could make this work too. So, Elon began his campaign, not just with investors, but with the public. He started talking openly about the project, discussing his vision for these transformative communities on social media, in interviews, and even at conferences. At first, some of his tech followers were confused. Why was Elon, the visionary CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, suddenly talking about homelessness? But as he explained his goals, more and more people began to see the larger picture. Elon wasn't just trying to change an industry, he was trying to change the very fabric of society. His plan, though, wasn't just about funding. It was about creating a model that would work, a model that could be scaled to meet the growing demand for solutions to homelessness in cities all over the United States and, eventually, the world. He envisioned a framework that could be adopted by governments and nonprofits alike, but that would also provide a self-sustaining revenue model. The goal wasn't to rely on constant charity or government aid. It was to build something that could stand on its own, something that could generate its own resources through the people who lived there and the businesses that supported them. One of Elon's most radical ideas was to create partnerships with tech companies that would provide training for residents. He wasn't just going to offer shelter. He wanted to offer skills, and he wasn't just thinking about low-level, menial work. Elon had a long-standing belief in the power of technology to change lives, and he wanted the people in these communities to have access to the very technology that had made his company successful. He envisioned partnerships with organizations like Code Academy, Coursera, and Udacity to offer online courses in coding, engineering, data science, and other high-demand fields. The key to this model was empowerment, teaching people not just how to survive, but how to thrive. It wasn't enough to provide a roof over someone's head. He wanted to give people the tools they needed to rebuild their self-worth and their future. He believed that everyone had potential, and with the right support and opportunity, even the most marginalized individuals could find their place in a rapidly changing world. Elon spent countless hours meeting with experts and potential partners, explaining his vision and gathering input. He reached out to tech industry giants to see if they would be willing to help fund this initiative or offer resources like free tech training and mentorship. He worked with government officials to begin securing land for the first pilot community, and soon, he was able to secure a partnership with the city of Los Angeles, where the homelessness crisis was most dire. But even as things began to fall into place, Elon couldn't ignore the deeper, personal significance of this project. His conversation with David had been a turning point, a reminder of why he was doing this in the first place. This wasn't just about building something to show off or to make headlines. This was about giving people a chance, a real chance to rebuild their lives. And that thought, more than any number on a spreadsheet or any technological breakthrough, was what kept Elon going when the obstacles seemed insurmountable. Do you think technology can play a role in solving societal problems like homelessness? How do you think innovation can help change lives for the better? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Elon Musk was no stranger to the kind of obstacles that could make or break a project. The early days of Tesla and SpaceX had been filled with setbacks, failures, and moments where it seemed as though his dreams would remain just that, dreams. But in those moments of doubt, Elon always found a way forward. He didn't let fear or uncertainty stop him. Instead, he used those obstacles as fuel to push harder, to innovate further, and to look for solutions where others saw only dead ends. As the days went by, his vision for the homelessness project started to gain traction. With the partnership secured in Los Angeles, Elon now had the green light to begin building the first community. It was still in the early stages, conversations with city officials, architects, and social service organizations, but the momentum was growing. And then, one afternoon, Elon received a call that would change the course of the entire project. It was from Sarah, a senior architect on the team he had assembled to help design the new community. She sounded excited, almost breathless. "Elon," she said, her voice tinged with urgency, "we've got something big. We've found a piece of land in a prime location right in the heart of downtown. It's a 10-acre plot that has everything we need. Easy access to public transport, proximity to services, and enough space for all the programs we want to implement. This is the site we've been waiting for." Elon's heart raced. Land had been the first major hurdle, and securing a location in the heart of Los Angeles, one of the most expensive cities in the world, felt like an impossible task. But somehow, against all odds, they had found the perfect space. "Where exactly is it?" Elon asked, trying to keep the excitement out of his voice. "Near Skid Row," Sarah replied. "It's the epicenter of the homelessness crisis in Los Angeles. This location could be a game changer, not just for the people living there, but for the entire city." Elon paused for a moment, absorbing the significance of what she was saying. Skid Row was ground zero for homelessness in Los Angeles. It was a place where the streets were lined with tents, and the desperate cries of people who had fallen through the cracks of society echoed day and night. But it was also a place that could serve as a beacon of hope, a place where Elon's vision could become a reality. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The city had been trying, unsuccessfully, to address the homelessness crisis for years. Local leaders had put forward plans, but progress was slow, and the issue was only getting worse. This land, this project, could finally be the catalyst for real change. Elon wasn't just looking to build housing. He was looking to build a solution that could be replicated across the country and eventually the world. Within days, Elon and his team had locked in the deal for the land. But this was just the beginning. The real work had only just begun. The first step was designing the community. Elon wasn't interested in creating just another shelter or halfway house. He wanted this to be a fully integrated ecosystem, something that would set a new standard for how society treated its most vulnerable citizens. This community would be more than just a place to sleep at night. It would be a place to live with purpose, to grow, and to heal. He gathered his team of experts, urban planners, architects, social scientists, mental health professionals, and more, to begin the process of designing the layout. They worked together to ensure that the community would offer everything residents needed to rebuild their lives: housing, mental health care, addiction recovery services, job training, and education. Elon even insisted that there be spaces for residents to pursue creative outlets, like art and music, believing that the power of expression could help with healing. One of the key features of the community would be its self-sufficiency. Elon's vision was to create a place that wasn't reliant on government funding or charity, but one that could generate its own revenue through a variety of means. There would be community-run businesses, job training programs, and opportunities for residents to contribute to the upkeep and success of the community. This, Elon believed, would help foster a sense of ownership, responsibility, and dignity. As the plans for the community took shape, Elon began to think about how technology could play a role. He had always believed that innovation could solve the world's most pressing problems, and he was determined to use technology to help the people living in this community. The community would be fully integrated with solar power and renewable energy, minimizing its environmental footprint. Each residence would be outfitted with the latest in sustainable technology, and there would be community-wide access to high-speed internet, allowing residents to take online courses and develop new skills. There would even be telemedicine services for residents who needed mental health counseling or medical care, ensuring that everyone had access to the support they needed. Elon's team worked tirelessly to bring this vision to life. It wasn't easy. There were countless meetings with city officials, discussions with nonprofits, and a mountain of red tape to navigate. But Elon's determination never wavered. He knew that this was his chance to create something that could truly make a difference. Then came the breakthrough Elon had been waiting for. One afternoon, as he sat with Sarah and the rest of the team, he received an unexpected phone call. It was from a prominent philanthropist who had been following Elon's project from the beginning. The philanthropist was intrigued by Elon's vision, but more importantly, he was moved by the personal nature of the project. He had lived in Los Angeles for decades and had seen firsthand the devastation of homelessness. He wanted to help. "I've been speaking with my colleagues," the philanthropist said, "and we want to make a significant contribution to the project. We believe in what you're doing, Elon. We want to help fund the first phase of the community. This could be the start of something truly transformative." Elon felt a wave of relief wash over him. This donation would be a huge step forward, allowing the project to move from the planning stage into reality. It was the financial backing that was needed to kickstart construction, hire more staff, and bring the community to life. "Thank you," Elon said, his voice filled with gratitude. "This is a game changer." As Elon hung up the phone, a sense of exhilaration washed over him. The vision was no longer a dream. It was becoming tangible. They had secured the land. They had the funding. And now, with the backing of key partners and philanthropists, the first community was set to be built. But even as things started to fall into place, Elon knew that the real challenge was still ahead. This was just the beginning. Building the first community was only the first step toward addressing the larger homelessness crisis. But as he stood there, looking out at the plans for the new community, Elon felt a deep sense of hope. He wasn't just building a place for people to live. He was building a future, one where opportunity, compassion, and innovation could intersect to change lives. The excitement around Elon's homelessness project was palpable. With the land secured, the funding in place, and a growing network of supporters, the first step toward creating the community was now within reach. But as always with Elon, the road ahead was anything but simple. This was no ordinary construction project. It wasn't just about building houses. It was about designing a new way of living, a new kind of community where the people who had been cast aside by society could find not only shelter but purpose. Over the next few months, Elon and his team focused their efforts on the design and logistics of building the community. Meetings with architects and urban planners grew more frequent as every detail was scrutinized. Elon was involved in every decision, sometimes to the frustration of his team, who were used to working on projects that were, in comparison, much more straightforward. This wasn't just a building. It was an entire ecosystem, a new model for how cities could address homelessness. One of the most significant aspects of the community design was its layout. Elon didn't want the typical high-rise shelters that made people feel like they were living in a warehouse. He envisioned a community that felt open, welcoming, and connected to the outside world. The buildings would be low-rise, with green spaces interspersed between them. The community would have parks, gardens, and communal spaces designed for people to gather, build relationships, and engage in social activities. There would be no fences or barriers separating residents from the rest of the city. The idea was to create a space that didn't feel isolated but integrated with the urban environment. One of the most ambitious aspects of the design was the community center, a hub where residents could access healthcare, job training, counseling, and educational programs. The center would also house a cafe and a market, where residents could work and learn skills in a supportive, low-pressure environment. Elon was adamant that these spaces should be as high-tech and modern as possible, featuring solar panels, energy-efficient appliances, and green technologies. This would not only reduce the environmental impact of the community, but also provide residents with an opportunity to learn about sustainable living practices. The community must be self-sustaining, Elon explained during one of the team meetings. We need to integrate renewable energy, vertical farming, and job training into everything we do. We're not just giving people a place to live, we're giving them the tools to thrive. As construction began, the project faced its first major challenge. The city of Los Angeles had its own set of regulations, codes, and zoning restrictions that made the development process more complicated than Elon had anticipated. While many city officials were supportive of the initiative, others were more hesitant. The idea of integrating such a large-scale, self-sustaining community into downtown Los Angeles raised questions about traffic, local infrastructure, and how it would affect the surrounding neighborhoods. Elon wasn't deterred. He saw these concerns as another challenge to overcome, not an obstacle. He met with city planners and other key officials to address their concerns head-on. The meetings were often intense, but Elon's calm, methodical approach eventually won people over. He outlined how the community would benefit the city as a whole by providing jobs, reducing the strain on local shelters, and offering a model for sustainable living that could be replicated in other cities. Meanwhile, the work on the ground was progressing. Excavators dug the foundation, construction crews set up temporary facilities, and the site began to take shape. The most difficult part was yet to come, the construction of the homes themselves. Elon had set an ambitious timeline, and though his team had learned to work quickly, there was still the challenge of keeping things on track without compromising the quality of the finished product. Every few days, Elon would make a trip to the site to check in on the progress. He was no stranger to hard work or tight deadlines. In fact, the pace of construction reminded him of the early days of SpaceX and Tesla, when every day was a race against time, and every setback felt like a personal failure. But this time, the stakes were different. This wasn't about rockets or electric cars. This was about real people, real lives, and the opportunity to make a tangible difference. During one of his visits to the construction site, Elon walked with Sarah, the lead architect, and surveyed the area. The space was still raw, just an empty plot of land with piles of dirt and construction equipment scattered about, but already, he could see the potential. In his mind, he could already picture the solar panels on the roofs, the vertical gardens in the common spaces, and the tech hubs where residents could learn to code and design their own future. Elon, Sarah said, her voice serious, I know you're passionate about this project, but we need to talk about the timeline. There are a lot of moving parts, and while we're moving fast, I'm worried we're pushing the team too hard. Elon nodded, acknowledging the concern. He was a perfectionist, and sometimes he pushed his teams harder than they were comfortable with, but in this case, he didn't want to lose momentum. I know, Sarah, but the longer this takes, the more people will continue to suffer. We can't afford to wait any longer. People are literally living on the streets, dying on the streets. I'm not willing to let this project be another one of those promises that gets lost in bureaucracy. We're going to make this happen. Sarah sighed but didn't argue. She knew Elon well enough to understand that once he set his mind to something, nothing short of a miracle would stop him. As construction continued, Elon started receiving updates from his team on the technological aspects of the community. They were integrating advanced tech solutions into nearly every aspect of the project, smart homes that could adjust temperature, lighting, and energy use based on the residents' preferences, AI-driven healthcare systems that would monitor residents' health in real time, and even self-driving shuttles that would transport residents to and from the community center. The goal was to ensure that the people living in this new community didn't just have access to a roof over their heads, they would be given the tools to integrate back into society, to work, to learn, and to grow. The idea was to remove as many barriers as possible, so that all a resident needed to focus on was rebuilding their life. One evening, as Elon walked the construction site alone, he stopped at the edge of the lot where the first set of homes would be built. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the land. It was quiet, except for the sounds of machinery in the distance. He paused and took a deep breath, letting the gravity of the project settle over him. This is it, he thought. This is the beginning. In the coming months, Elon would see his vision come to life. But for now, he took a moment to reflect on everything that had led him here. The conversations with David, the challenges of finding the right partners, the struggles to secure funding. All of it had been leading up to this moment. This project wasn't just about building homes. It was about rebuilding lives. With construction well underway, Elon Musk's vision for the first self-sustaining homeless community in downtown Los Angeles was starting to take shape. The 10-acre site was no longer just an empty lot. It was transforming into something that would soon be a beacon of hope, a place where people who had been cast aside by society would have the opportunity to rebuild their lives. Elon's leadership had set the pace, but it was the combined effort of the architects, construction workers, social experts, and tech innovators that was turning the dream into reality. As he stood on the edge of the construction site, Elon felt a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. It wasn't that he doubted the success of the project. It was that he knew how much was riding on it. This was more than just a new development. This was a model for a better future, one that could be replicated in cities all over the country, and eventually around the world. Yet, as any entrepreneur would know, big ideas rarely come without resistance. As the construction progressed, so did the debates about the project. While some local officials and community groups praised the initiative, others voiced concerns. Skid Row had been a historically neglected part of the city, and people were skeptical about how a high-tech, self-sustaining community would fit into the area. There were fears about gentrification, whether the new community would push out existing residents and drive up property values, making it harder for those already living on the streets to afford housing. The issue of displacement was a sensitive topic, one that Elon had anticipated. The last thing he wanted was for his project to make things worse for people already struggling to survive. To address these concerns, Elon made sure to hold open forums with the local community. He wanted to hear directly from the people who had lived in Skid Row for years, who had first-hand experience with the problems in the area. It wasn't about imposing an outsider's solution. It was about creating something that worked for everyone, especially those who needed it most. In one such meeting, Elon sat at a table with several community leaders, residents of Skid Row, and local activists. It was an intimate but tense setting. The room was filled with people who had witnessed the struggles of homelessness firsthand, and the skepticism was palpable. One man, a longtime Skid Row resident named Robert, stood up and addressed Elon directly. "How do you plan to make sure people like me aren't just pushed out?" he asked, his voice rough but firm. "What if this project just ends up being another way to clean up the streets and get rid of us?" Elon listened carefully. He had expected this question, and he had thought long and hard about it. "I understand your concerns," Elon said, meeting Robert's eyes. "And I can assure you, this project is not about pushing anyone out. It's about bringing opportunity, dignity, and a sense of community back to people who've been left behind. We're not just building homes, we're building a future for everyone, not just those who can afford it." He went on to explain the initiatives within the project designed to benefit the existing Skid Row community. There would be affordable housing options specifically reserved for people who had been living on the streets. There would be job training programs for everyone, not just for those in the new community, but for those already living in the area. He also made sure to emphasize that the project would not drive up rent prices or cause displacement. It would instead aim to stabilize the local economy, bringing in new jobs, services, and resources that would benefit everyone. While some in the room remained skeptical, others seemed reassured by Elon's words. They appreciated that he wasn't just focusing on the wealthy or the newly homeless. He was considering the long-term needs of the existing residents of Skid Row. The conversation didn't end there, but it marked a turning point. For the first time, the project seemed less like an imposition and more like a real solution. It wasn't just a promise from an outsider. It was a tangible opportunity that could help heal some of the wounds that had been festering in Skid Row for decades. As the weeks passed, more and more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The homes were taking shape, with eco-friendly designs that featured solar panels, water recycling systems, and energy-efficient appliances. The community center was nearly complete, with dedicated spaces for mental health counseling, job training, and educational programs. The residents would have access to state-of-the-art technology, including high-speed internet, so they could take online courses or work remotely if they chose to. It was a community designed not just for survival, but for opportunity. Elon continued to work closely with his team, monitoring every detail and making sure that everything was moving forward according to plan. He was known for his high standards, and this project was no exception. He made frequent visits to the site, ensuring that every aspect of the construction met his vision for a sustainable, community-driven space. But even with all the progress, Elon knew that the real challenge was still ahead: finding the right people to fill the community. It wasn't just about building homes and services. It was about creating a sense of belonging, helping people who had spent years on the streets rediscover their purpose. The key to this, Elon believed, was offering not just a place to stay, but a place to grow. He wasn't interested in creating another temporary shelter. His goal was to provide a stable foundation where people could rebuild their lives. And for that to happen, they needed more than just physical shelter. They needed education, mental health support, job opportunities, and a sense of community. To that end, he worked closely with social service agencies and local nonprofits to identify people who were ready to make a change. They needed individuals who were motivated, who had the will to take advantage of the opportunities the community would offer. But even for those who weren't yet ready, Elon made sure that support systems would be in place to help them take those first critical steps toward recovery. The day the first residents were selected was a monumental one. Elon stood with Sarah and the rest of his team in front of the newly completed homes, watching as a small group of people walked through the gates for the first time. These were individuals who had been living on the streets for years, struggling to find a way out. But now, thanks to the community they were about to call home, they had a chance, a real chance, to turn their lives around. Elon felt a profound sense of satisfaction watching them take their first steps into their new lives. This was the moment that proved all the hard work, the struggles, and the obstacles had been worth it. The community was no longer just an idea. It was a living, breathing space filled with hope and possibility. But as always, Elon knew this was just the beginning. The real work, helping people rebuild their lives, offering them the tools and support they needed to succeed, was only just starting. The first morning that residents moved into the newly constructed community was nothing short of historic. The sun had barely risen over the downtown Los Angeles skyline when Elon arrived at the site, his usual determination giving him an almost electrifying energy. Today was more than just the completion of a building. It marked the beginning of a new chapter for people who had faced years of uncertainty, hardship, and struggle. Today, they would have a chance at a future, something that had seemed out of reach for so long. Elon watched as the first group of residents arrived, their eyes wide with disbelief. For many, this was the first time they had ever walked into a building that felt like home. There were no security bars on the windows, no locked gates at the entrance, no signs of neglect or decay. The homes were modern, clean, and warm. Everything that the people walking through the doors had hoped for but never thought possible. A woman named Linda, one of the first residents to arrive, stood at the threshold of her new home, her hands shaking as she stepped inside. She was in her early 40s and had spent the last decade living on the streets, moving from one temporary shelter to another, never quite feeling safe or settled. Linda had tried to get back on her feet many times, but the cycle of homelessness always pulled her back in. Now, for the first time, she felt something different. Hope. This is mine? Linda asked, her voice thick with emotion as she gazed around the cozy, well-lit room. A small kitchenette was tucked into one corner, and the walls were painted in soothing tones of green and blue. The space was simple but inviting. It felt like home. Yes, it's yours, Elon replied gently, offering her a warm smile. This is your new beginning. Linda nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know what to say. I've never had anything like this before. Elon didn't need to say anything more. He simply nodded, understanding the enormity of what this moment meant to her, and to everyone who was about to call this place home. As more residents began to trickle in throughout the day, the sense of community began to take root. The first few hours were filled with quiet, tentative steps as people explored their new homes. But as the afternoon wore on, the mood began to shift. Conversations started to form, first between neighbors, and then among larger groups. People were meeting each other, exchanging stories, and starting to realize that they were not alone anymore. They had each other, and they had the support of the entire community behind them. For Elon, this was the culmination of years of hard work, but it was also a reminder of just how much more needed to be done. The buildings, the technology, the plans, they were all just the beginning. The real work of rebuilding lives, of helping people who had lived through unimaginable hardship, would take time. There were still many challenges ahead, both for the residents and for the community at large. One of the key components of Elon's vision for the community was the integration of support services right from the start. In addition to the physical homes, The community center was fully equipped to offer a range of services, from mental health counseling to job training programs. Elon wanted the residents to have access to everything they needed to rebuild their lives. Not just a roof over their heads, but the tools and resources to help them stand on their own. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Linda, along with several other residents, signed up for job training programs designed to teach them marketable skills that would help them find stable work. There were courses in basic coding, plumbing, carpentry, and more. The community center's cafe also opened, giving residents the chance to work and learn skills in hospitality. It was a chance for them to not only earn a living but to gain the confidence and self-worth that many had lost over the years. One of the first success stories came from a man named Marcus. Marcus had been living on the streets of Skid Row for almost 15 years. He was a skilled mechanic, but years of instability had made it difficult for him to hold down a job. When he moved into the community, he was skeptical about the job training programs. He had tried programs in the past that promised to help but never followed through. But something felt different about this place. One morning, Marcus walked into the community center, ready to start the auto repair course. He was nervous but determined. Elon, who had been visiting the site that day, stopped by the center to check on the new program. Seeing Marcus, he walked over and introduced himself. "Are you ready to get started?" Elon asked, offering his hand. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then shook it. "I think so. I've never had the opportunity to learn in a place like this before. I just want to work again. I've spent too long doing nothing." Elon nodded, his voice warm and reassuring. "That's what we're here for, to give people a second chance." By the end of the week, Marcus had already begun fixing up old cars in the workshop, showing incredible promise. It was clear that the program was already having an impact, not just on the skills of the residents, but on their mindset. They were starting to believe in themselves again, to realize that they were capable of more than they had thought. As the weeks turned into months, the community continued to grow and thrive. More residents moved in, bringing with them their stories, struggles, and dreams. For some, the road to recovery was long and difficult. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and failures. But the key difference was that this time, the community wasn't just offering a place to stay, it was offering a pathway forward. One of the most heartwarming moments came when Linda, the woman who had been the first to move into the community, returned to the community center one afternoon with a broad smile on her face. She had found a job working as a receptionist at a nearby medical clinic. It wasn't the dream job she had always imagined, but it was a job, a stable, steady one that would allow her to support herself and take care of her new home. "I never thought I'd be able to do this," Linda told Elon when she saw him. "I'm so grateful for this opportunity. I never would have believed it was possible." Elon smiled. "You did the work, Linda. We're just here to provide the tools. The rest is all you." As more success stories began to unfold, it became clear that Elon's community was working. The blend of technology, sustainability, and support services was providing a holistic approach to solving homelessness, and the residents were thriving as a result. But even with all the progress, Elon knew this was just the beginning. The first community in Los Angeles had proven that it could work, but the true challenge would be expanding it to other cities, scaling the model to meet the needs of homeless populations around the country. As he walked through the streets of the community, Elon felt a deep sense of fulfillment. But he knew that as long as there were people still living on the streets, the work was far from finished. Months passed, and Elon's community project continued to evolve, its success steadily building momentum. The first residents who had once wandered the streets of Skid Row, looking for a sense of stability, had begun to find their footing. People like Linda and Marcus, who had never believed a better life was possible, were now thriving, working, attending courses, and even mentoring newcomers. It was an incredible transformation, but for Elon, it was also a reminder that the true impact of the project would extend far beyond these walls. One morning, Elon met with Sarah and a few of his key team members in the community center's conference room. They had spent months making sure the infrastructure, programs, and support systems were in place. The next step, however, was something much bigger, expanding the model to other cities. They had received letters and inquiries from all over the country, from New York to Chicago, from San Francisco to Miami, curious about how the project could be replicated. "It's working here," Elon said, looking out over the team, "but we have to scale it. We can't let it be an isolated success. This needs to be something that spreads to every city with a homeless crisis." Sarah nodded, her fingers tapping on the table as she thought about the logistics. "It's not going to be easy. There are different political climates, different economic situations. Each city has its own unique set of challenges. But if we can show them that it's possible, that it works, we can start making real change." Elon paused for a moment, thinking. He knew Sarah was right. Every city would require a tailored approach, and there would undoubtedly be opposition. But he had seen firsthand how lives could be turned around with the right resources, the right care, and the right environment. And he believed the lessons learned in Los Angeles could be adapted and applied elsewhere. "Let's start with one more city." "Just one," Elon said, his voice resolute. "We'll find a city where the need is critical, but where the political leadership is open to innovative solutions. We'll show them what this can do. If we succeed there, the ripple effect will be unstoppable." The team got to work immediately, researching cities with the highest rates of homelessness and identifying areas where the community model could fit. It wasn't long before they zeroed in on Seattle, a city with a large homeless population and a local government that had recently expressed interest in trying new solutions. It was a perfect fit for their expansion plans. In the weeks that followed, the team spent long hours planning the logistics of the new project. They worked with local city officials, social service agencies, and nonprofits to identify areas of the city where a new community could make the most impact. They also worked to secure funding, recruit local construction teams, and ensure that the necessary services would be available from day one. This was going to be a massive undertaking, but Elon and his team were undeterred. By the time they were ready to break ground in Seattle, Elon had become a figurehead for a new approach to homelessness. His reputation as a tech visionary and philanthropist made headlines, and people from all walks of life were watching to see if his ambitious idea would succeed. Social media buzzed with speculation, and various news outlets picked up the story. Could Elon Musk's model work in Seattle? Would it be a game-changer in the fight against homelessness? Or was it just another grand idea that would fall short? When the groundbreaking ceremony finally arrived in Seattle, Elon stood before a crowd of reporters, city officials, and advocates, ready to make his case once again. He spoke about the lessons learned in Los Angeles, about the importance of providing not just shelter, but opportunity. He emphasized the need for a long-term solution, one that addressed the root causes of homelessness and gave people the tools they needed to rebuild their lives. "This isn't just about building homes," Elon said, his voice clear and passionate. "It's about building futures. It's about giving people the chance to be more than their circumstances." In Los Angeles, we've seen firsthand how this approach works. Now, we're going to bring it here to Seattle. And together, we can show the world what's possible. The crowd applauded, and for a brief moment, Elon allowed himself to feel a sense of accomplishment. This was only the beginning, but he knew the potential was immense. If they could make this work in Seattle, it could ripple outward, affecting cities across the nation. As construction began in Seattle, the media attention grew. Reporters arrived to cover the progress, interviewing residents from the Los Angeles community who had agreed to speak about their experiences. Their stories were compelling, tales of struggle, resilience, and, most importantly, transformation. Linda, who had become a mentor in the Los Angeles community, traveled to Seattle to speak at an event about the difference the community had made in her life. Standing in front of a crowd, she shared her journey. "For years, I lived on the streets, moving from shelter to shelter, trying to survive. But I never felt like I had a chance. When I moved into the community in Los Angeles, something changed. I wasn't just given a place to stay, I was given a future. I found a job. I went back to school. And now, I'm helping others do the same. I'm proof that it works." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, many of whom had never fully understood the complexities of homelessness. As Linda spoke, Elon looked around at the faces in the audience, some hopeful, some skeptical. He could see that they were starting to understand the depth of what he was trying to accomplish. This was not just a housing project. This was a movement, a new way of thinking about homelessness, and perhaps a new way of thinking about society's responsibility to its most vulnerable. Back in Los Angeles, The original community continued to thrive. Residents continued to find new opportunities, and the success stories piled up. Marcus, the mechanic who had been skeptical at first, had already started his own small auto repair shop with the help of a microloan. He was employing several other residents from the community and mentoring them as they learned the trade. Linda had continued to grow in her role as a receptionist at the medical clinic, but she had also started taking evening classes in business management. Her dream was to one day open her own community center to help others who were struggling like she once had. The ripple effect had begun. Elon's idea had sparked something far greater than just a new way of housing the homeless. It had sparked a shift in perspective, one that saw people not as problems to be solved, but as individuals with the potential for growth, change, and a new life. And as the community in Los Angeles continued to flourish and the project in Seattle took shape, it became clear that this was only the beginning. The ripple effect of kindness, opportunity, and empowerment was only growing. And with each new city, each new success story, it was becoming harder for anyone to ignore the power of what was unfolding. Do you believe that providing housing and job opportunities can truly break the cycle of homelessness? What other steps do you think are crucial for creating lasting change? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Despite the growing momentum and success stories, Elon Musk's ambitious project to tackle homelessness was not without its challenges. As the project expanded to Seattle, and with plans to extend it to more cities, it faced mounting resistance from various corners. While many people supported the initiative, others questioned whether it was a practical solution to such a deeply rooted societal issue. Critics came in many forms: political leaders, local activists, and even some members of the media who were skeptical about the long-term effectiveness of the approach. The first signs of resistance appeared when the Seattle City Council began to deliberate on the project. While many council members were enthusiastic about the potential benefits, others were hesitant. There were concerns about the cost, the feasibility of replicating the Los Angeles model, and whether it could be sustainable over time. We've been tackling homelessness in Seattle for years, and no one has come up with a real solution, one of the council members, Councilwoman Michelle Grayson, said at a public hearing. It's not just about giving people homes. It's about addressing the systemic issues that keep them on the streets. This project sounds like a nice idea, but we need a more concrete plan. Elon listened carefully to her words, understanding her concerns. It wasn't the first time he had heard such criticism, but it still stung. He had spent years thinking about how to break the cycle of homelessness, and he believed deeply in the effectiveness of his model. But he also knew that these conversations were essential. If the project were going to have a lasting impact, it needed to be robust enough to withstand scrutiny. I appreciate your concerns, Councilwoman Grayson, Elon replied, standing at the podium. We're not proposing a quick fix. This is a long-term solution, and it's going to take time, resources, and collaboration. But we believe that by providing not just homes, but job opportunities, mental health support, and education, we can break the cycle of homelessness. This isn't just about putting a roof over someone's head. It's about giving them the tools to rebuild their life. The room was quiet as Elon spoke, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But Councilwoman Grayson wasn't convinced. With all due respect, Elon, the problem with homelessness is not just about a lack of housing. It's about a lack of affordable housing. And it's about the fact that our city is grappling with rising rent prices, a lack of mental health resources, and an economy that doesn't work for everyone. You're suggesting that a high-tech community could solve these problems, but how do you plan to make it affordable? How will it benefit everyone, not just those who can afford to live in the community you're building? Elon nodded, knowing these were legitimate concerns. We're committed to keeping the costs down, he said. The design of the community incorporates sustainable, energy-efficient technologies that lower overall costs. Additionally, we're setting aside units specifically for low-income residents, including those who are transitioning out of homelessness. The idea is to create a model that can eventually become self-sustaining, not just through the housing itself, but through job creation, local business growth, and partnerships with nonprofits. Despite his efforts, the skepticism was palpable, and after several weeks of back-and-forth debates, the Seattle City Council postponed a vote on the project, citing concerns over funding and the logistics of implementing such an ambitious plan. It was a hard blow to Elon and his team, who had worked tirelessly to get the project off the ground. But Elon wasn't the type to back down. He knew that changing the narrative around homelessness wasn't going to be easy. He believed in the power of his idea, and he wasn't about to let a few setbacks stop him from trying to bring it to life. Back in Los Angeles, the community continued to flourish. More residents had moved in, and the success stories were piling up. But even as the community thrived, Elon felt the weight of the resistance in Seattle pressing on his shoulders. He had to find a way to show the skeptics that his vision wasn't just possible, it was necessary. It was then that he decided to take a more hands-on approach. Rather than just relying on politicians and media to make the case for the project, he would go directly to the people, especially those who had experienced homelessness themselves. He knew that the strongest stories were the ones that came from the individuals who had lived through it. Elon and his team began organizing a series of community events in both Seattle and Los Angeles, where residents of the community would share their experiences. The goal was to put a human face on homelessness, to show the public that these weren't just statistics or abstract problems, but real people with dreams, skills, and potential. One of the most impactful moments came when Marcus, the mechanic who had opened his own auto repair shop, spoke at an event in Seattle. Standing before a crowded room, he shared his story of life on the streets, his doubts about the community when he first moved in, and how he had found not just a job, but a renewed sense of purpose. "I was living on the streets for years," Marcus began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I tried everything, jobs, shelters, programs. Nothing worked. But when I moved into the community in Los Angeles, something changed. I wasn't just given a bed to sleep in. I was given a future. I learned new skills. I found a job. I'm supporting myself now, and I'm helping other people do the same. This isn't just about housing. It's about creating opportunities. It's about giving people a chance." The room was silent as Marcus spoke. Many in the audience were visibly moved by his story, and even the skeptics in the crowd seemed to soften. In the weeks that followed, the narrative around the project began to shift. The media picked up on the personal stories of transformation, stories like Marcus's and Linda's, showing that the community model was more than just a nice idea. It was working. Councilwoman Grayson, who had been one of the most vocal critics, attended one of the community events. After hearing firsthand accounts of the impact the community had made on residents, her tone began to change. "I've seen the statistics," she said at a follow-up council meeting, "but seeing these stories in person has made me realize that this project is more than just a theoretical solution. It's real, and it's working." Grayson went on to express her support for moving forward with a revised version of the plan. "We can't keep doing the same thing and expect different results. It's time for something new. Let's work together to make this happen." By the end of the year, the Seattle City Council had voted to approve the project, with significant amendments that addressed some of the concerns raised by critics. The revised plan included a focus on affordable housing options for low-income residents and a commitment to working closely with local organizations to ensure that the project integrated with Seattle's existing support systems for the homeless. Elon knew the battle wasn't over. There were still many obstacles to overcome and many more cities to reach. But the approval in Seattle marked a critical turning point, a moment when the project had proven itself not just through statistics or projections, but through the lives it had already touched. Elon stood on the construction site in Seattle one morning, looking out at the foundation of what would soon become another community. His heart swelled with a quiet sense of triumph, but he knew the journey was far from complete. The real work was just beginning. For the first time in his life, he felt a sense of purpose beyond business and technology. This was about people. This was about change. And with each new city, each new story of success, the ripple effect would continue. As the Seattle project progressed and the Los Angeles community continued to thrive, Elon Musk found himself increasingly immersed in the day-to-day operations of the initiative. The battle for approval in Seattle had been a pivotal moment, but it was only the beginning of what would be a much larger journey. More cities were looking at the project, and the pressure to make it a success weighed heavily on him. The resistance that had once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle was beginning to recede, replaced by a growing coalition of supporters. Still, there were doubts that persisted, doubts about the scalability of the project, about its potential to provide lasting change. Could the model really work in cities with different economic dynamics, political landscapes, and social climates? Would the model be sustainable once Elon and his team moved on to other projects? Despite these lingering questions, Elon remained steadfast in his belief that the project was more than just a good idea. It was an imperative. What had started as a single vision in Los Angeles was now becoming a movement, and it was one that Elon was determined to see through to its fullest potential. But scaling the initiative, especially to other cities, meant bridging the gap between those who supported the project and those who still questioned its viability. It meant building partnerships with local governments, community leaders, and even private sector players who could contribute resources. In Los Angeles, Linda had become a local hero within the community. Her transformation from a homeless resident to a community leader had inspired many. She had helped dozens of new arrivals navigate their way through the system, finding jobs, enrolling in education programs, and securing permanent housing. She was a living testament to the power of the program, and her influence extended far beyond the walls of the community center. Linda's success story had garnered the attention of local businesses, many of whom had begun to offer job opportunities to residents. A few months ago, she had partnered with a local cafe owner, Sarah Patel, to create a training program specifically for those in the community who were interested in working in the food service industry. The partnership had proven successful, providing steady work for several residents who had been trained as baristas and cooks. One afternoon, as Linda walked through the community center's garden, she ran into Elon. He was inspecting the progress on a new building that would house more apartments for incoming residents. His presence was commanding, but there was something different about him today. He seemed more focused, more reflective. "Hey, Elon," Linda said, a warm smile on her face. "What's on your mind?" Elon looked up at her, clearly deep in thought. I've been thinking a lot about scaling this project, about making it sustainable in the long term, not just in terms of money, but in terms of the people involved. How do we make sure it works in cities where the needs are different? How do we bring the right people into this so it's not just a Musk project, but a collective effort? Linda sat down on a bench nearby, thinking carefully. She had seen firsthand the impact the community had on her life, and she knew that the model's success depended on how well it was integrated into the larger fabric of each city it was introduced to. "I think the key is relationships," she said slowly. "It's about making sure we're not just seen as outsiders coming in to fix things, but as partners with local organizations, city officials, and residents. When people see this as a collective effort, they're more likely to get on board. And when they feel invested in it, that's when change happens." Elon nodded, considering her words. Linda had always had a way of cutting to the heart of things. She was right. In Los Angeles, the community was thriving because the people within it were working together, helping each other. It wasn't just about the infrastructure or the funding. It was about the relationships being built. And if that same spirit of collaboration could be replicated in other cities, the model could succeed far beyond what anyone had imagined. The Seattle project was progressing at a faster pace than Elon had anticipated. Construction was ahead of schedule, and early signs indicated that the project was beginning to gain traction. The city's social service agencies, local businesses, and even grassroots organizations were increasingly involved, helping to create a foundation of support that could carry the project forward. But not everyone was convinced. Some community members were still hesitant, particularly in the more affluent neighborhoods near the project site. There was an undercurrent of resistance among those who feared that the project would bring crime, decrease property values, or strain local resources. Elon knew that overcoming this resistance would require more than just positive media coverage or political lobbying. It would require a concerted effort to engage the community and address their concerns directly. So, he and his team organized a town hall meeting, a forum where residents could ask questions, express their concerns, and learn more about the project. The meeting was held in a large auditorium, with rows of chairs filled with people from all walks of life: local business owners, city officials, activists, and concerned residents. Elon stood at the front, flanked by Sarah and a few key team members, ready to answer whatever questions came their way. The first few questions were skeptical, even hostile. "How can you guarantee this won't turn into another ghetto?" one woman asked. "We don't want to see our neighborhood become a dumping ground for people who don't belong here." Elon listened carefully, his face calm but serious. He had encountered this kind of fear before, and he knew that simply brushing it off wouldn't work. "I understand your concerns," he said, his voice steady. "And I assure you, this is not a project that will isolate people or segregate them. The goal is to integrate, to create opportunities for people who have been marginalized. These are people with skills, with dreams, who are ready to contribute to the community. This is about creating a safe, sustainable environment for everyone, not just a select few." Another question came from a local business owner who voiced concerns about the potential strain on city resources. "What about the schools? The healthcare system? The police?" he asked. "How are you going to ensure that adding more people to the neighborhood won't overwhelm these systems?" Elon paused before responding, understanding the validity of the question. "We're not just building homes, we're building partnerships," he said. "We've worked with the city to ensure that there will be adequate resources in place. The community will have access to education, job training, healthcare, and mental health services. We're not doing this in a vacuum. We're doing it with the support of local agencies and organizations that have experience working with these issues. It's not just about housing. It's about the infrastructure that allows people to succeed." The room remained quiet for a moment as the crowd absorbed his words. Then, slowly, a few heads nodded. Elon could see the skepticism in their eyes begin to soften. Over the next hour, as more questions were answered, the tension in the room eased. By the end of the meeting, while not everyone was fully on board, the majority seemed cautiously optimistic about the project's potential. After the meeting, Sarah approached Elon as they walked out of the auditorium. "That went better than expected," she said. "There were a lot of hard questions, but I think people are starting to see the bigger picture." Elon sighed, a mix of exhaustion and relief on his face. "Yeah, but we've still got a long way to go. There are a lot of people out there who don't believe in this yet. But we'll keep going. We have to." As they walked into the evening sun, Elon's mind raced with the next steps. They had won over some of the skeptics in the room, but the real work was just beginning. Seattle would need time to adjust, to build trust. But Elon was confident. This was more than just a project. It was a new model for solving an age-old problem, and he was determined to see it succeed. As the Seattle project began to take shape, the momentum that had been building in Los Angeles carried over. The ripple effect of Elon Musk's bold vision started to spread, and before long, other cities began to take notice. New York, San Francisco, Austin. Cities across the United States were looking at Musk's initiative with curiosity, some with skepticism, but many with hope. The critical question was always the same. Could this work in their city? The answer, however, was never straightforward. Each city faced its own unique challenges, different economic dynamics, political climates, and social issues. The model that had been so successful in Los Angeles needed to be adaptable, flexible enough to meet the needs of diverse populations and local conditions. But as Elon looked at the increasing interest from city leaders, philanthropists, and even tech companies, he realized that the real strength of the initiative wasn't just in the homes it created, or even in the jobs it provided. The real power of the project lay in its ability to unite people, to bring together a coalition of unlikely partners, all working toward a common goal. In Los Angeles, the community continued to thrive. Marcus's auto repair business had expanded, and he was now training other residents in the art of car repair. Linda had taken on a leadership role, working with other organizations to ensure that the community's social programs were operating smoothly. The cafe Sarah Patel had opened with Linda's help was thriving, offering not just jobs, but also acting as a hub for social interaction and support. It was during one of these social gatherings that Elon found himself standing in the cafe, sipping on a latte and watching the community interact. He had always been more comfortable in the world of tech, of systems and machines. But here, in this bustling cafe, he felt something different, a sense of connection, of people truly coming together to help one another. Linda noticed him standing by the window and walked over, a cup of coffee in her hand. "You look like you're deep in thought," she said with a smile. Elon nodded, glancing around the room. "I'm just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, this was just an idea. Now, look at it. People are working, they're living, they're thriving. I've always been a problem solver, but this feels different." Linda followed his gaze, her eyes taking in the room full of people, some laughing, some deep in conversation, others just enjoying their coffee. "Yeah," she said softly. "This is the heart of it. People helping people. It's not just about buildings. It's about changing lives." Meanwhile, in Seattle, things were beginning to fall into place. The building projects were on track, and the local government had not only approved the project but was actively partnering with local nonprofits to help provide services to incoming residents. Local businesses, once wary of the project, had begun to step up, offering job training and employment opportunities to those who had been part of the program. But the true test of whether this model could scale to other cities came when the first group of residents moved into their new homes. They had come from shelters, from the streets, from lives filled with hardship and uncertainty. Now, they were entering a brand new chapter. One such person was Tyler, a former Navy veteran who had struggled with mental health issues and addiction after returning from deployment. He had spent years in and out of shelters, unable to find stable work or housing. But when he moved into the new community in Seattle, something changed. For the first time in years, he felt hopeful. "I've been to so many programs, seen so many solutions," Tyler said in an interview with a local news station. "But this is different. It's not just a bed. It's a chance to work, to rebuild. I'm working now, and I've never felt more alive." Tyler's story echoed the stories of so many others in the community, people who had been written off by society, people who had been ignored or marginalized, but who now had an opportunity to rebuild their lives with dignity and purpose. With Seattle moving ahead, and Los Angeles already showing results, Elon found himself meeting with city leaders from other areas interested in replicating the project. New York was the next big target. Elon was scheduled to meet with Mayor James Bennett, a no-nonsense leader who had long been frustrated by the city's failure to make a significant dent in the homeless crisis. The meeting was held in the mayor's office, a sleek modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Mayor Bennett sat behind his desk, flipping through a series of documents. He looked up as Elon entered, offering a quick handshake. "I've seen the reports from Seattle and Los Angeles," Mayor Bennett said, his voice clipped. "But the question remains. Can you really replicate this success in a city as large, as complex as New York?" Elon sat down across from him, leaning forward slightly. "I think the real question is, can we afford not to try? We've seen what's possible in Los Angeles and Seattle. The model can be tailored to any city. The key is to focus on sustainability, affordable housing, job creation, and mental health services. It's about giving people the tools to rebuild their lives." The mayor was silent for a moment, studying Elon's face. "It sounds good on paper, but how do you plan to address the entrenched issues here? The economic disparity? The lack of affordable housing? How do you deal with that?" Elon exhaled slowly. He had heard similar questions before, but they still carried weight. "The system we're building is about integration. It's not about creating a separate community. It's about creating opportunities that people can step into. If we don't start somewhere, we'll never get anywhere." Bennett paused, then nodded slowly. "I want to see the model in action. I want to meet with people who have lived in these communities and hear their stories. Until then, I'm not making any promises." It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was a crack in the door, a sign that New York might be ready to take the leap. Back in Los Angeles, the ripple effect continued. Local tech companies began to see the value in supporting the initiative, offering to partner with the community to provide job training in emerging fields like coding and digital marketing. Some of the most successful startups in the area were now providing internships for residents, offering mentorship and helping them build resumes. Elon had never been one to focus on short-term results, and he knew that even with the initial success, the true test of the project's impact would come over time. He was committed to seeing it through, to ensuring that every person in the community had the tools they needed to build a better life. One afternoon, as Elon was walking through the community center in Los Angeles, he was stopped by a young woman named Jessica. She had recently completed a job training program and was about to start her first full-time job at a tech company. Her eyes were bright with excitement. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I was living on the streets 6 months ago. I didn't think I had a future. But now, I'm starting a new job and I have my own place. This community gave me more than just a roof. It gave me hope." Elon smiled, his heart swelling with pride. This was why he had pushed forward with the project. This was the impact he had dreamed of, people who had been lost, forgotten, now finding their way back. The ripple effect was real. From city to city, stories like Jessica's were multiplying. People who had once been invisible were stepping into new lives, new opportunities. And Elon realized that, more than anything, this project was about more than just homelessness. It was about human potential, about giving people the chance to thrive, not just survive. And as he looked toward the future, he knew that this was only the beginning. The ripple effect had only just begun to spread. As Elon Musk looked out over the horizon, standing on the rooftop of a newly constructed building in Seattle, he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. The success of the Los Angeles and Seattle projects had proven that the idea was viable. People were finding homes, getting jobs, and beginning to rebuild their lives. But now, the real test had arrived. New York City was the next frontier. It was the largest city in the country, home to millions, and had long been grappling with its own unique set of challenges when it came to homelessness. In a city defined by its extremes, wealth and poverty living side by side, Elon knew that even the most meticulously planned project could face insurmountable hurdles. Could his initiative truly succeed in the heart of a city that was constantly moving, constantly evolving? The question had been on Elon's mind for weeks, and as he boarded a flight to New York to meet with Mayor Bennett again, the weight of the task ahead settled on his shoulders. He had already seen the struggles of people like Tyler and Jessica in Los Angeles, the obstacles that came with building a community from scratch. Now, in New York, the stakes felt even higher. The city's sheer size and complexity meant that every decision would be magnified. One wrong move could derail the entire project. Back in Los Angeles, the community continued to thrive. The program was expanding, and residents who had come from shelters or the streets were now thriving. Sarah Patel's cafe was becoming a local hotspot, and Marcus, who had learned auto repair, was now teaching others the trade. Linda had even helped a few local high school students find internships and jobs within the community. But Linda, too, was beginning to sense the weight of it all. She was proud of the progress they had made, but as the program expanded, so did the demands. More and more people were relying on the community for support, and Linda found herself juggling multiple roles, acting as both a mentor and a manager, handling the logistics of job placement and working closely with new residents. It was exhilarating, but exhausting. One morning, as she prepared breakfast for the community center's weekly meeting, she received a text from Elon. Heading to New York. Need you to keep an eye on things in LA. Your leadership here is key. We'll touch base soon. It wasn't the first time Elon had relied on her, and it wasn't the first time she had been thrust into a leadership role. But each time, it felt more significant, more real. This project had become her life, too. Linda put the phone down and turned to look around the bustling community center. There was so much to be proud of, but she knew the real work was just beginning. Meanwhile, in New York, the wheels were in motion. Elon had arranged a series of meetings with the city's top officials, as well as with nonprofit organizations and social service providers. The city was notorious for its bureaucracy, and many questioned whether such a large-scale initiative could succeed in a place with such entrenched problems. Mayor Bennett had agreed to meet with Elon again, though he was still cautious. The last meeting had been productive, but it had left a lot of unanswered questions. New York was a different animal. The city had tried and failed to address homelessness time and time again, and there was no shortage of people ready to point out the flaws in Elon's model. But Elon was determined to show them that this wasn't just another government-funded program. This was a comprehensive system, one that combined housing with job training, mental health care, and community support. As Elon stepped into Mayor Bennett's office for their follow-up meeting, he was prepared to answer the tough questions. This time, there was no room for ambiguity. "I've looked over the reports," Mayor Bennett said, his tone serious. "But what we need to understand is this. How are you going to manage the scale of this in New York? The size, the logistics, how do you plan to make this sustainable long-term?" Elon leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the desk. "It starts with a small, pilot program. We can't transform the entire city overnight, but what we can do is focus on one area, an area with high need. but also one where we can create a critical mass of success stories. We have the resources, we have the technology, and we have the partnerships. Bennett raised an eyebrow. And how do you plan to address the concerns of residents? You know this city. People are suspicious of anything that looks like a quick fix. You'll face a lot of resistance. Elon nodded, fully aware of the challenges. We're not here to impose. This is a partnership with the city, with local organizations. We're not taking a one-size-fits-all approach. The goal is to integrate people into the existing fabric of the city, not isolate them. There will be jobs, education, and housing, but also a focus on mental health and social support. We're taking a holistic approach. The mayor leaned back in his chair, pondering the words. I've heard promises like this before, but the scale, how do we make sure it doesn't just turn into another failed program? Elon paused, considering. I'm not here to make promises. I'm here to show you what's already working, and together, we can make it work here. We've seen success in smaller cities. We've seen what happens when people get a chance. But we need to start small, prove it works, and scale from there. Bennett's gaze softened, but he wasn't ready to fully commit. All right, I'll give you a chance to prove it. But this will be a pilot. You'll have 6 months. Let's see how you do with the first phase. It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was progress. Elon felt a surge of relief. But he knew that the real work was only just beginning. Back in Seattle, Linda and Elon kept in touch frequently, coordinating strategies and sharing insights. While Elon was in New York trying to get the project off the ground, Linda had her hands full managing the expanding community in Los Angeles. One of the most pressing challenges was finding ways to ensure that residents could not only stay in the community but could also thrive once they moved out. The goal was always to give people the tools they needed to live independently, without creating a system of dependency. Linda had a conversation with Sarah Patel one afternoon over coffee, discussing the future of the project. I think we're doing well here, Sarah said. But we need to think about the long term. What happens when people get too comfortable here? How do we push them to take the next step? Linda frowned, considering the question. It's about creating opportunities, not just for survival, but for growth. We need to help people take ownership of their lives again, whether that's through work, through education, or just through the chance to make decisions for themselves. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. It's not just about housing. It's about dignity. Linda smiled. Exactly. It's about giving people the opportunity to rebuild their lives with dignity. And that means sometimes pushing them out of their comfort zone, but in a way that makes them feel empowered, not forced. As Elon boarded his flight back from New York, the weight of the future rested on his shoulders. The pilot program would launch in just a few weeks, and it would be a defining moment. Could the model he had worked so tirelessly on actually scale to a city as complex as New York? Would the skepticism that had plagued other cities be a hurdle they couldn't overcome? But for now, as he gazed out the airplane window, he was reminded of one simple truth. Every journey, no matter how long, starts with one step. And the first step was already behind him. It was early spring in New York City when Elon Musk returned, his mind buzzing with the possibilities that the upcoming pilot program represented. He had made significant progress with Mayor Bennett, who, after much deliberation, had agreed to give the project a chance. 6 months. 6 months to prove that this model could be more than a dream. But as much as the mayor's cautious optimism meant to him, Elon knew that the real challenge wasn't in the meetings with city officials, but in the lives of the people who would be directly impacted. The plan was clear. The project would start in a neighborhood with high levels of homelessness and unemployment. The first step was identifying a location with the infrastructure already in place to support the new initiative, but also a community willing to take a chance on something that could either succeed spectacularly or fail miserably. Elon stood with his back to the wind on a rooftop overlooking the skyline, feeling the weight of the city's complexity in the air. New York wasn't like Seattle or Los Angeles. It was bigger, more chaotic, and far more diverse. A city of this scale would require a unique, more nuanced approach. He had to be ready to adapt. The first day of the pilot program kicked off with the launch of the new housing units. Situated in a neighborhood that had long struggled with poverty, crime, and a lack of affordable housing, the community had seen few tangible improvements in recent years. Residents had grown accustomed to government promises that never quite came to fruition, leaving them cynical, skeptical of any new initiatives. But Elon was determined. The homes were already built, and the first group of people had been selected to move in. They were individuals from various walks of life. Some had struggled with addiction, others had been displaced due to economic hardship, and a few had been veterans returning from service. All had one thing in common. They had been given a chance to rebuild their lives. The morning of the move-in, Elon arrived early at the site, a former industrial district now transformed into a vibrant residential area. The sound of construction was still in the air, but there was something else too, a palpable energy. He met Linda on site, who had flown in from Los Angeles to help manage the initial transition. She was already in action, coordinating the teams who were handing out keys to the new residents. "I can't believe we're here," she said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "We've talked about this for so long, but now it's real." Elon smiled, but his gaze was fixed on the people arriving, some cautiously, others with visible excitement. He could see the uncertainty in their eyes, but also something else, hope. That afternoon, the first group of residents moved into their new homes. Tyler, a Navy veteran from the Bronx, was among the first. He had spent years struggling with PTSD and addiction, bouncing between shelters and short-term housing programs, none of which had given him the support he truly needed. But when he stepped into his new apartment, something shifted. It was small, but clean and furnished, with a simple note from the team welcoming him. "This is your new beginning. We believe in you." Tyler stood in the middle of the room, taking it all in. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of ownership. The community was far from perfect. There were growing pains, adjustments to be made, conflicts to resolve. But as the days passed, Tyler and the other residents began to connect. They attended meetings where Linda and Elon talked about the importance of mental health, the resources available to help them find jobs, and the plans for local businesses to provide training and employment opportunities. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of the past seemed too heavy to overcome. But Tyler, like many others, had a reason to keep moving forward now. He was part of something bigger than himself. The success of the first few weeks was a mix of small victories and inevitable setbacks. There were those who struggled with the transition, long-time homeless individuals who were not used to the structure of daily routines or the expectations placed on them. But there were also moments of pure triumph. Jessica, one of the first residents in the Seattle program, had relocated to New York to help with the pilot. She was a natural leader, and her success story was one that others gravitated toward. She had gone from living on the streets to becoming a tech trainee, and now she was mentoring others in the program, helping them understand the value of taking one step at a time. "I know it's tough right now," Jessica told a small group during one of the community meetings, "but I'm proof that it can work. I was where you are now. But now, I have a job, I have a home, and most importantly, I have a future. It's not about perfection, it's about progress." Elon and Linda worked side by side, constantly refining the program. They were often up late, discussing how to better integrate mental health services, job training, and education into the daily life of the community. It wasn't just about offering people a home. It was about giving them the tools they needed to sustain it. One of the most challenging aspects of the project was dealing with the city's bureaucracy. There were constant regulatory hurdles, zoning issues, and logistical roadblocks that seemed to come from every direction. But with each problem, Elon found himself relying more and more on the support of the community, whether it was local nonprofits offering their expertise or residents who were eager to get involved and help make the project work. Despite the frustrations and occasional setbacks, the project continued to show results. The number of people moving out of the community to take up jobs or further their education began to grow. For the first time in years, there was a genuine sense of possibility in the air. One evening, as Elon stood outside the building, watching the sunset over the skyline, he received a call from Mayor Bennett. It was the kind of call that could change everything. "Elon," the mayor began, his voice calm but measured. "I've been keeping an eye on things. I'm hearing from residents, from local businesses, and from the community leaders. It's working. The pilot program, people are responding. We're seeing the positive impact. It's not perfect, but it's better than anything we've tried before." Elon's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "That's great to hear, but we've still got a long way to go." "I agree," Bennett said, "but I'm ready to talk about expanding. If we can replicate this success, if we can show that this works on a larger scale, I'm willing to push for citywide adoption." Elon let the words sink in. A citywide initiative. It was the opportunity they had been waiting for. The chance to take everything they had learned and scale it to reach more people. "Thank you, Mayor," Elon said. "We're just getting started." Later that night, as he reflected on the call, Elon knew that this was just the beginning. The pilot had proven that it was possible to create real change, that it was possible to help people who had been forgotten. But there were still many more challenges to face. He was up for it. After all, if there was one thing he had learned from the past year, it was that nothing truly worthwhile came without hard work, sacrifice, and an unwavering belief in what was possible. And now, the real work was beginning. What do you think of Elon Musk's vision for tackling homelessness in New York? How do you think other cities could learn from this model? Share your thoughts in the comments below. With the pilot program in New York gaining momentum, Elon Musk couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a critical juncture. Mayor Bennett's offer to expand the program citywide was a huge step forward, but it was also fraught with challenges. The resources required to scale such a project in a city as complex as New York would be immense. More partnerships would need to be forged, more systems created, and more people convinced that this wasn't just another government-funded experiment. It was a real, lasting solution. It wasn't just about money or resources. Elon knew that scaling the initiative meant transforming the very foundation of how homelessness was viewed, not just by the public, but by the individuals affected by it. There was an overwhelming need to break the cycle of dependency, to offer real support, and to help people rebuild their lives from the ground up. But to do this, the program would have to evolve. It couldn't just be about providing temporary housing. It had to be about creating long-term, sustainable change. As he walked through the streets of the pilot neighborhood, now teeming with residents working to make the most of their new opportunities, Elon felt the weight of his decision to scale. He had seen firsthand how a single, well-supported community could change lives. He had watched people like Tyler, Jessica, and others thrive in an environment that offered support, dignity, and a sense of purpose. Tyler, in particular, was a beacon of success. Since moving into the new unit, he had been sober for over 3 months and was enrolled in a job training program to become a construction supervisor. But it wasn't just the skills that had changed. Tyler's entire outlook on life had been transformed. He had begun volunteering to help other residents settle in, offering advice on how to navigate the system and make the most of the opportunities available. "None of this would have been possible without the support," Tyler said during a group meeting. "The housing is just the first step. The real change happens when you're given the tools to change your life." And that's exactly what this program is giving us. Real tools to build our futures. Tyler's story was a reflection of the program's success, but Elon knew that scaling it to a city as large as New York would require a deeper, more systemic change. And that would require more than just residents who were motivated. It would require an entire city to shift its perception of homelessness, from something that was seen as a social problem to something that could be solved with the right support and resources. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Linda had been managing the growing community with increasing confidence. The original residents were now transitioning out of the program, finding jobs, and moving into apartments of their own. The success stories were starting to pile up, and each one reinforced the idea that this model could work on a much larger scale. However, Linda faced an unexpected challenge as the community continued to grow. The larger the program became, the more complex the logistics. There were more people to support, more needs to address, and more risks of failure. To handle this, Linda had taken on a new role, developing a sustainable, long-term support network for the residents as they moved through the program. The goal wasn't just to house people, but to help them thrive independently once they had transitioned out. She worked closely with local businesses to create training and apprenticeship opportunities and collaborated with social workers to ensure residents had access to mental health services. The idea was to create a self-sustaining ecosystem where people could rely on each other, build their networks, and eventually graduate from the program, moving into the mainstream job market and housing system. Linda's efforts were beginning to pay off. Sarah Patel's cafe was thriving, becoming a staple in the community and hiring several of the residents. Marcus had opened an auto repair shop and was offering apprenticeships to others. The community, which had once seemed fragile and tentative, was now becoming a solid, functioning unit that could stand on its own. But as Linda received a message from Elon asking for her support in New York, she knew that scaling the initiative required more than just the logistical effort. It required nurturing a community spirit, a sense that each individual's success contributed to the whole. And while she was proud of the progress they had made, she couldn't help but feel the pressure of the larger mission ahead. Back in New York, Elon gathered a team of experts in various fields to begin laying the groundwork for the citywide expansion. He brought in urban planners, mental health professionals, social workers, and representatives from nonprofit organizations to help design the program. The goal was clear. They would need a comprehensive approach that integrated housing, employment, mental health care, education, and community-building initiatives. Elon sat at the head of the table, reviewing the plans with the team. "We can't just build houses and expect people to succeed," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to create an entire system of support, one that treats people as individuals with unique needs, not as a problem to be solved." The team nodded in agreement. "We'll need more than just housing," said one of the urban planners. "We'll need public spaces, job centers, healthcare facilities, and educational institutions. We'll need everything to be interconnected. We've learned from the pilot," Elon added. "We need to provide people with stability, jobs, mental health care, education, and a sense of community. We can't just offer them a roof. We need to give them the tools to rebuild their lives." The meeting continued late into the afternoon as the team worked through the logistics of the citywide program. They decided to divide New York into several pilot areas, each focusing on a specific aspect of the program: affordable housing, job training, mental health services, and community integration. Over the next several months, these areas would become test sites for a larger, integrated approach to solving homelessness. As the first batch of residents in New York began to move into their homes, a sense of cautious optimism hung in the air. The community was diverse: veterans, displaced families, and young adults who had been on the streets for years. But despite the differences in their stories, they all shared one common trait: a desire to reclaim their lives and build something better for themselves. In the first few weeks, Elon and Linda continued to check in regularly, offering guidance and support where needed. Linda flew in from Los Angeles to meet the New York residents, sharing her experience with the team and helping to troubleshoot issues that arose. "I know what you're going through," she said at one of the meetings. "I've seen how hard it is to make that transition from being on the streets to having a home, a job, and a future. It's not easy, but it's possible, and you've got the support you need here. Don't be afraid to lean on it." Her words struck a chord with the residents, many of whom had spent years feeling abandoned by society. As Linda spoke, Tyler, now a mentor in the New York program, stood up and nodded. "We're all in this together," he said. "I've been where you are, and I know it's hard. But trust me, the moment you realize that you're not alone, that's when everything starts to change." With the citywide initiative now underway, Elon felt a renewed sense of hope. The vision was no longer just a possibility, it was becoming a reality. But as always, he knew that the work was far from over. The expansion into New York was only the first step. There were still more cities to reach, more lives to change, and more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in a long while, Elon believed that the impossible was within reach. And as long as people like Tyler, Jessica, and Linda continued to believe in the mission, the project had the potential to reshape the future of homelessness in America. The weeks following the announcement of the citywide expansion were a blur of activity. Elon Musk and his team moved quickly, driven by the momentum of the success in New York and the knowledge that they were on the brink of something revolutionary. But, as they would soon learn, big ambitions often come with equally big challenges. One of the first hurdles they encountered was the growing pressure from local businesses. In many neighborhoods where the pilot program had been launched, property values had begun to rise rapidly. While that was a good sign in some ways, it also led to concerns about gentrification. Long-term residents worried that the housing program would attract wealthier people to the area, pushing them out of their homes. The real estate market in New York was already fragile, and many feared that this new wave of development would further strain the neighborhoods that had been historically underserved. Elon had always believed in the power of technology and innovation to solve big problems, but he wasn't blind to the nuances of the situation. It wasn't enough to build homes and offer jobs if the very communities they were trying to help felt displaced by the changes. He understood the importance of balancing progress with preservation, especially in such a complex city like New York. Linda, back in Los Angeles and continuing to manage the program there, noticed a similar trend. "We're starting to see resistance," she said during one of their late-night calls. "In some areas, residents feel like we're changing the identity of their neighborhoods too fast. People are scared that they'll be priced out." Elon leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he processed the information. "We need to make sure we're not just building homes, Linda. We need to build communities. People should feel empowered, not pushed aside. This is not a zero-sum game where only the newcomers win." Meanwhile, Tyler, now a mentor in the New York program, began to notice some of the new residents growing anxious about their place in the rapidly changing neighborhood. As much as they appreciated the opportunity, many were struggling to adjust to the growing tensions in the community. Tyler had witnessed firsthand how people who were once in the depths of despair could thrive if given the chance, but he could also sense the unease among those who feared the future. Tyler met with Elon and Linda to discuss how to address these concerns. "The program is great," Tyler began cautiously, "but the atmosphere in some of these neighborhoods is changing too quickly. People are nervous. I mean, they've been abandoned before by promises of progress that never came through, right? The question now is, can we really offer them stability without pushing them out when the neighborhood becomes too expensive for them to live in?" Elon nodded, his mind racing. He knew Tyler was right. "I hadn't fully thought about that aspect," he admitted. "We've been so focused on helping the residents that we might not have taken into account the bigger picture. It's not just about providing a roof. It's about ensuring that people can remain in their homes long-term." They spent the next few hours discussing possible solutions. The idea that seemed to resonate most was one where the program would focus on developing mixed-income communities where new housing would blend in with existing structures. This way, the program could foster growth without displacing the people who had lived in the area for years. Elon also considered the idea of rent control or offering long-term affordable housing to ensure that the original residents wouldn't be forced out due to rising property values. Despite these efforts, not everyone was as optimistic about the program. The media began to take notice of the rising tensions. Headlines like, "Is Elon Musk's homeless housing program gentrifying New York?" and "Can the homeless really find stability in an expanding community?" started to dominate news cycles. These stories painted the program as an experiment that was on the verge of failure, citing concerns from local residents, politicians, and urban development experts. The narrative was simple. The program's success could come at the cost of the community's integrity. Elon knew the media could make or break any project of this scale, and this was a challenge he wasn't prepared for. He could see how easily the story could be twisted, and it frustrated him. But rather than retreat, he decided to face the scrutiny head-on. He called for a press conference, determined to clarify the program's mission and address the growing concerns. On the day of the press conference, the tension in the room was palpable. Reporters packed the conference hall, their cameras clicking away in anticipation. Elon stood behind the podium, his usual calm demeanor masking the internal pressure he felt. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but nothing could truly prepare him for the questions that would come. A reporter from the New York Times was the first to ask, "Mr. Musk, you've received criticism that your program is, in fact, gentrifying neighborhoods under the guise of helping the homeless. How do you respond to these claims?" Elon took a breath, his voice steady but firm. "This project was never about gentrification," he began. "It's about providing people with the resources they need to rebuild their lives: homes, jobs, mental health care, and most importantly, dignity. We've been incredibly careful to ensure that these changes are inclusive, not exclusive. The people we're working with are not just recipients of aid. They are the people driving this change. We're not just building homes. We're building communities." A reporter from the Wall Street Journal followed up. "But how do you reconcile that with the reality of rising property values in the neighborhoods where you've launched the program? Aren't you worried that people who've lived there for years will be pushed out? Elon paused, looking directly at the reporter. That's a valid concern, and it's one we take very seriously. We're committed to maintaining affordable housing options for long-term residents. As part of the scaling process, we're working to integrate mixed-income housing and exploring rent control solutions so that existing residents are not displaced. The goal is to create a neighborhood where everyone has a place to stay, whether they've lived there for years or are just starting their journey. The questions continued for nearly an hour, but Elon remained calm and resolute. He could sense the skepticism in the room, but he also felt the momentum of the work they had already done. He knew that this wasn't going to be easy. It was never going to be easy, but he also knew that he had the right vision and the right team to make it work. After the press conference, Elon walked outside to the waiting car, his mind still swirling with the weight of the day's conversation. He had faced the toughest critics, but he wasn't backing down. The stakes were too high. Back in the New York pilot program, Tyler sat in his new apartment, staring out at the skyline. He thought about the challenges ahead. There was so much still to be done, but for the first time, he truly felt part of something larger than himself. The program wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for people like him, that made all the difference. As the weeks went by, the media attention eventually started to shift. The stories began to focus more on the positive impacts of the program. The number of people who had found stable employment, the success stories of individuals like Tyler and Jessica, and the way the community was beginning to thrive despite the challenges. But Elon knew that the true test of the program's success wouldn't be measured in headlines. It would be measured in the lives that were changed, the people who found hope again, and the communities that remained intact. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, Elon was more determined than ever to see the project through. As the tension surrounding the expansion of the homelessness program continued to rise, there was one thing that Elon Musk hadn't anticipated: the emergence of an unlikely advocate. His name was Charlie, an elderly man who had lived in New York for over 4 decades and had never been interested in much of the technology or media hype that Elon and his company generated. But Charlie's voice would soon become a crucial one, and he would become a symbol of the very success Elon had hoped for. Charlie lived in the neighborhood surrounding the pilot program. He had been a New Yorker his entire life, and like so many others, he had seen his city change in ways that made him uncomfortable. Gentrification was a word that haunted him, the erosion of the familiar streets, faces, and small businesses that he had known for years. But there was something about the homeless housing initiative that made him think twice. At first, Charlie had been skeptical, like many of his neighbors. He had lived in the area long enough to know that not all social programs ended up being successful. He had seen initiatives come and go without making a real impact, and he wasn't sure if Elon Musk's flashy promises would be any different. But there was one thing that gave him hope: the residents themselves. Charlie had been walking his dog one evening when he saw something that stuck with him. One of the new residents, a young man named Marcus, was standing on the corner, talking to an older woman who looked to be in her late 60s. Marcus had once been homeless but had now secured a job as a mechanic through the housing program. The two of them were chatting about the weather and, more importantly, about Marcus' job prospects. "What's your next step?" the woman asked. "Honestly, just keep working hard and saving," Marcus said. "I'm looking at getting my own place soon. This program's changed my life." Charlie paused, watching the conversation unfold. He had grown up in a time when neighbors helped one another, when people believed in hard work and personal responsibility. It was rare to see such conversations these days, especially in a neighborhood where people tended to keep to themselves. But there was something in Marcus' words, something genuine, that gave Charlie a renewed sense of hope. The next day, Charlie attended a community meeting. He wasn't sure why he went. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe he just felt compelled to learn more. At the meeting, there were representatives from the program explaining how it worked, talking about the partnerships with local businesses, and outlining the plans for the coming months. But as the discussion turned to the concerns of gentrification and neighborhood change, Charlie stood up. "I've lived here for 40 years, he began, his voice steady but loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "I've seen neighborhoods rise and fall, but there's one thing I know: we're all human. I've seen these people who've come in from the program. They're working hard. They're not asking for a handout, they're asking for a chance. The room fell silent. Charlie wasn't the typical person to speak at such meetings, and his words had a surprising weight. Gentrification? Yeah, it's real. But let me tell you something. I've seen worse things happen to this city. People have been pushed out, sure, but we don't have to do that to our neighbors. These people deserve a chance, just like anyone else. We all deserve a chance. Charlie's unexpected speech had an immediate impact. Residents who had been on the fence about the program began to reconsider their stance. They could see that Charlie, a lifelong New Yorker, wasn't speaking from a place of politics or ideology. He was speaking from the heart. He had seen the cycles of change, but this time, it felt different. Elon heard about Charlie's speech from a local reporter who had attended the meeting. At first, he wasn't sure what to make of it. But as he read the coverage, he realized something. Charlie's endorsement, however unintentional, was a powerful moment in the narrative of the program. It wasn't just about tech moguls or government officials backing the initiative. It was about ordinary people, from all walks of life, coming together to make a difference. Charlie's story was shared widely on social media, with many people applauding his perspective. Some called him a reluctant hero, others a voice of reason. But one thing was clear. His words had begun to change the tone of the conversation. Elon decided to meet Charlie in person. It was a crisp fall afternoon when Elon drove to the neighborhood to meet Charlie. As they sat down at a small diner, Charlie greeted him with a firm handshake and a skeptical smile. "I never thought I'd be having coffee with someone like you," Charlie said with a chuckle. "Never thought I'd be standing up at a community meeting either." Elon smiled. "I guess we both got a little unexpected, huh?" Charlie leaned back in his chair. "Well, let's be honest. I don't know much about tech or space or any of that. But what I do know is that people can change. And what I've seen here in this neighborhood, with these people, gives me hope." Elon nodded, humbled. "That's exactly why we're doing this, Charlie. It's not about the tech or the headlines. It's about people. People like you, like Marcus, like everyone who's been given the chance to get back on their feet. I don't know if you're going to solve everything," Charlie said, his eyes thoughtful. "But I can tell you this. The people here aren't looking for a miracle. They're looking for respect. They're looking for a chance to prove themselves. And if you can do that, well, you might just change the world." Elon felt a quiet surge of gratitude. Charlie's words resonated deeply with him. This wasn't just a project or an experiment. It was a movement, fueled by the real stories of struggle and triumph. And it wasn't going to be easy, but it was worth fighting for. In the weeks that followed, Charlie became an unofficial ambassador for the program. He spoke at community events, met with local politicians, and used his voice to calm the growing fears of gentrification. He was a living testament to the idea that communities could thrive without leaving anyone behind. Meanwhile, Elon continued to push forward with the expansion. The team had worked tirelessly to address the concerns surrounding gentrification, creating new policies to ensure that the neighborhoods benefited everyone, not just the newcomers, but the longtime residents as well. They focused on mixed-income housing, local job creation, and community-driven initiatives. As the program grew, so did the support. But it wasn't just about the numbers or the media coverage. It was about real change, small but powerful moments like Charlie's, where people came together, saw each other for who they really were, and decided to act for the greater good. As Elon and his team pushed forward, they knew they weren't just creating housing. They were creating hope. And while the future was still uncertain, one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of a much larger movement. The momentum for Elon Musk's homeless housing initiative was gaining steam, but with it came new challenges, and not all of them were external. As the program expanded across New York and other cities, Elon began to feel the weight of the responsibility. The stakes were high, and he knew that every move they made would be scrutinized. There was no margin for error, and the pressure was starting to show. It wasn't just the media or the public that Elon had to worry about. The increasing complexity of managing a program of this scale had created new hurdles within his own organization. While the housing initiative had started with a clear vision of helping the homeless, the growth was introducing competing interests, budget concerns, and the logistical nightmare of managing such a large-scale project. Linda, who had been at the forefront of the initiative in Los Angeles, saw Elon's stress firsthand during one of their weekly strategy meetings. She had watched him juggle SpaceX, Tesla, and other projects, but she hadn't seen him this exhausted. The once unshakable Elon Musk seemed to be questioning himself more than ever. "Elon," Linda said, her voice calm but firm, "you need to take a step back. You're not in this alone." Elon looked up at her, his eyes tired. "I know, Linda, but I can't help feeling like we're not moving fast enough. Every day that goes by, more people are suffering. The system is broken, and I have the means to fix it, but it feels like no matter how hard I push, it's never enough." Linda nodded. "You've made incredible strides, Elon, but you can't do it all. You need the team, the community, and, yes, the residents themselves to drive this. You've given them a chance. Let them lead." Elon didn't say anything for a moment. He had always been the one to take the reins, the one to push the envelope, to make the impossible possible. But Linda's words were starting to resonate. Maybe it wasn't about him taking charge of every detail. Maybe it was about letting the initiative become what it needed to be, something bigger than any one person, even him. Meanwhile, Tyler, who had become one of the program's success stories in New York, was continuing to help the newest residents adjust to their new lives. He had become a mentor for many of the formerly homeless individuals who had joined the program. He knew exactly what they were going through, and his empathy and experience made him an ideal guide. One evening, Tyler was walking through the neighborhood when he noticed a woman sitting on the sidewalk, her head in her hands. Her clothes were tattered, and she looked lost. He immediately recognized her, Jessica, a young woman who had recently moved into one of the new units. He had seen her before, working hard to get back on her feet, but today she looked different. Something was off. He knelt beside her and gently asked, "Hey, Jessica, everything okay?" She looked up, her eyes red. I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Everything's moving so fast. I've been through so much, and now I'm supposed to figure out how to keep going, and I feel like I'm failing." Tyler sat down beside her, offering a comforting presence. He'd seen this before, the fear of failure, the overwhelming pressure to succeed after so many years of feeling invisible. "It's okay to feel that way," he said gently, "but you're not alone. We're all in this together. One step at a time." Jessica wiped her eyes and nodded, though her worry was still evident. "But I don't even know where to start. I've got this place now, but I don't know how to build a future. Everything feels like it's falling apart." Tyler looked at her, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "When I first got here, I felt the same way. Like the world was too big, and I was too small. But you're here now, and that's more than half the battle. You've already made it through the hardest part." Jessica met his eyes, a flicker of hope beginning to replace the doubt. "You really think so?" "I know so," Tyler said. "We'll figure it out together, okay? It's not going to be easy, but you've got this. You're stronger than you think." Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, the program was starting to gain national attention. The success stories of people like Tyler and Jessica were making their way into the media, and while there were still critics, more and more people were beginning to see the initiative for what it truly was: a chance for real, sustainable change. Elon had always been an advocate for technology-driven solutions, but as the program evolved, he began to see the deeper importance of human connection. This wasn't just about providing housing. It was about creating opportunities, building communities, and restoring dignity to people who had been discarded by society. And while technology played a crucial role, the heart of the program lay in the people who were living it every day. Charlie, the elderly New Yorker who had become a vocal supporter of the program, was one of the most vocal advocates for the human side of the initiative. His words continued to resonate with people, and his message of hope and inclusion was spreading across the city. It wasn't just about Elon Musk. It was about people coming together for a common cause. Charlie, in his quiet way, had become the voice of the movement. One cold December evening, Elon found himself sitting in his office, looking out over the city lights. His phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "Linda, we've got a surprise for you. You should see this." Curious, Elon opened the link she had sent. It was a video, a simple, raw footage of a community celebration in one of the neighborhoods where the program had been implemented. People were gathered in the streets, laughing and talking, playing music, and sharing food. The faces were diverse, young and old, from all walks of life. There were families, individuals, and children running around, happy and free. In the background, Charlie's familiar voice was speaking to the crowd. "People will tell you that we can't change things," Charlie was saying, his voice carrying over the laughter. "They'll say that it's too late, that the problems are too big. But look around you. This is what change looks like. This is what happens when we stop pretending that the future belongs to the rich and start believing that it belongs to everyone." Elon watched in silence, a lump forming in his throat. He had been so focused on the technical and logistical sides of the project that he had almost forgotten the most important thing. This was about people. This was the change he had been working toward, but it wasn't just his change. It was the community's change, and it was real. As the video ended, Elon felt a deep sense of gratitude. He wasn't sure what the future held for this program, but in that moment, he knew one thing. They were on the right path. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but the people were leading the way now, and that was all that mattered. The winds of change were sweeping through the city. What had started as a small initiative, a homeless housing program backed by technology, was now becoming something far greater than anyone had anticipated. There was an undeniable shift in the air, and it was palpable. As the program expanded, the faces of people who had once been invisible were now taking center stage. From the streets to boardrooms, from social media platforms to neighborhood town halls, a collective movement was unfolding. But with growth came new challenges. The media, once largely silent or skeptical about the initiative, had now become both a powerful ally and a relentless critic. Elon Musk, who had always been comfortable under the public's gaze, found himself under increasing pressure. The stakes were no longer just about housing. It was about changing an entire social system, and there was no blueprint for that. It was the day of the city's largest public event yet. Elon, along with Charlie, Tyler, and several other success stories from the program, were scheduled to speak at a community gathering in downtown New York. The event was meant to celebrate the impact the initiative had already made, but it also served as a platform to address concerns and take the next step in pushing the program to new heights. The air was electric with anticipation, as reporters, local leaders, and hundreds of residents from various neighborhoods gathered in the square. Elon stood backstage, reviewing his notes, when Linda approached him. She could sense his anxiety. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soothing but firm. Elon nodded, but didn't speak immediately. He had learned that sometimes silence carried more weight than words. "I know you're nervous," Linda said, "but you've done this before. This is different, yes, but it's still about people. You're giving people a chance to succeed. That's the story, and the world needs to hear it." Elon gave a half-smile. "I just wish the world would see the bigger picture, that it's not just about housing, or even just about technology. It's about dignity. But it feels like the media only sees it in terms of profits and policy." "Let them," Linda said. "We know what it is, and they'll eventually catch up." As the event began, Elon and his team took to the stage. The crowd was a mix of skeptics, supporters, and those who simply wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Elon started speaking first, his words measured, his tone resolute. "We're not here today to give you a quick fix, or to promise that all of society's ills can be solved overnight," he began, his eyes scanning the crowd. "But we are here to say one thing. Everyone deserves a chance. And if we can change the way we think about homelessness, about poverty, about opportunity, then we can change the future. Not just for a few, but for all of us." The crowd was quiet for a moment. Elon had spoken passionately, but he knew the real story wasn't his to tell. It was the stories of those who had come through the program and were living proof that change was possible. Charlie was next. 40 years ago, I moved to New York City with big dreams," he began, his voice strong despite his age. "I didn't have much, but I had hope. And that hope was what kept me going through the tough times. But here's the thing. Hope alone isn't enough. You need opportunity. You need a chance. And what Elon's program is giving people is that chance. It's not about handouts. It's about giving someone the tools to help themselves." As Charlie spoke, the crowd began to shift. There was something in his words that reached people, something authentic, something undeniable. Charlie's face was familiar to many in the crowd. He wasn't a celebrity or a politician. He was a New Yorker who had lived the struggle and was now offering a solution that didn't require sympathy, but respect. Next, Tyler stepped forward. The once homeless mechanic had become an unlikely hero in his own right. He had found his way to stability through the program, and now he was helping others do the same. As he spoke, his message was simple yet profound. "Everyone here has a story," he said, "and every one of those stories is different. But what we have in common is that we've all had someone give us a hand when we needed it most. And now it's time for us to give back. This program isn't just about providing a roof over someone's head. It's about rebuilding a life." Tyler's words were raw, and they resonated deeply with the audience. You could feel the collective sigh of relief as the crowd began to understand. This wasn't just about charity. It was about real people making real change. As the event wound down, Elon felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't expected. The day had been a success, but there was still a long way to go. In the days that followed, news outlets began to pick up on the story. Headlines, once skeptical or dismissive, now acknowledged the positive impact the program was having on individuals and neighborhoods. Slowly but surely, the narrative was shifting. However, not everyone was convinced. The political landscape, both local and national, had started to grow more contentious. Some politicians and pundits began to question the long-term sustainability of Elon's program. The fear of gentrification was still looming large in many communities, and questions about funding, transparency, and accountability were becoming louder. Elon knew that he couldn't let the critics derail the progress that had been made. But there was one particular criticism that cut deeper than the others, that the program was too reliant on Musk's wealth, and that without his financial backing, it would crumble. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting with city officials, Elon found himself walking alone through the streets of New York. The city felt different at night, distant, almost surreal. As he walked, he thought about the people he had met during this journey. The faces of Tyler, Jessica, Charlie, and the others flashed in his mind. They were the true success stories. They weren't just benefiting from a program, they were shaping it. Elon stopped by one of the newly built housing units. The lights inside were on, and through the windows, he could see people talking, eating, laughing, living. In that moment, he realized that this was more than just a project for him. It was a legacy, something that could stand the test of time long after the headlines had moved on to the next big story. This program wasn't just his creation. It was the creation of every single person who had ever been homeless, who had ever fought for a second chance, who had believed that they could do better. And maybe, just maybe, that belief would ripple out into every other aspect of society. As he stood there, lost in thought, Elon heard a voice behind him. "You did it, Elon. You really did it." He turned around and saw Charlie walking toward him, a smile on his face. "I don't know about that," Elon said, shaking his head, "but we're getting there." Charlie's smile widened. "You're getting there. And so are we." The years had flown by, but the impact of Elon Musk's homelessness initiative continued to grow, much like the ripple effect of a single stone thrown into a still pond. What had begun as a visionary project aimed at using technology to tackle one of society's most intractable issues had transformed into a movement, a testament to the power of innovation, empathy, and human connection. But no great journey is without its obstacles, and as Elon Musk stood on the rooftop of one of the many newly constructed housing units in New York, he knew that the battle was far from over. The program had changed lives, his own included, but the world was still watching, waiting for the next chapter. And in his mind, the next step wasn't just about expanding the program. It was about ensuring that it was sustainable and could evolve beyond its original scope. The numbers were impressive. Thousands of homeless individuals had found homes, jobs, and stability through the initiative. Entire neighborhoods had been revitalized, thanks to partnerships with local businesses and the building of sustainable, eco-friendly housing that fit seamlessly into urban landscapes. The social fabric was changing, slowly but steadily. And yet, despite all the good, there were still critics who questioned the model. Was this a temporary fix, or could the changes last? The latest public poll revealed mixed reactions. While the majority applauded the initiative's success in providing immediate shelter, some were concerned about its long-term financial viability. Others, like political opponents and rival tech moguls, questioned Musk's methods, arguing that the program was, in essence, another example of corporate philanthropy that relied too heavily on one person's fortune. Could the model be replicated on a global scale? Would it eventually be absorbed into the bureaucracy of traditional government systems? Elon had heard all the arguments before, but what resonated most with him wasn't the criticism. It was the voices of the people who had been directly impacted by the program. He thought of Tyler, Jessica, and Charlie. He thought of the children he'd seen running through the new neighborhoods, and the families who had been able to stay together because they had a roof over their heads. These were the voices that kept him moving forward, even when the pressure seemed unbearable. It was a quiet morning when Elon received a phone call that would mark the beginning of the next chapter. It was from Linda, his longtime collaborator in the program, who had been overseeing the expansion into other cities. Elon, we've done it. We've secured a partnership with several major international NGOs. They're on board to bring this initiative to Europe, Asia, and Africa. They believe in what we're doing, and they're ready to help us scale globally, Linda said, her voice full of excitement. Elon took a deep breath, allowing himself to take in the magnitude of what she was saying. For years, he had focused on one thing at a time, getting the program off the ground, making it work in New York, and then expanding it to a handful of cities. But now, the world was ready to take notice. And for the first time, Elon allowed himself to believe that this could be the beginning of something much bigger. That's incredible, Linda. But there's more work to do. We need to ensure that every new partnership aligns with the core values of this initiative: dignity, autonomy, and sustainability. We can't let bureaucracy or red tape slow us down. Linda chuckled. I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Elon, but we're ready for it. This is just the beginning. As the global expansion began, the voices of those who had benefited from the program continued to resonate. The media was now paying attention, not just to the high-tech aspects of the initiative, but to the human stories at its core. People like Tyler, who had become a mentor for others, and Jessica, who had started her own nonprofit to help others like her, were becoming ambassadors for the cause. Their stories were being featured in documentaries, news segments, and social media campaigns. Even Charlie had become a symbol of resilience, his face appearing in advertisements for the program that now ran in multiple countries. But the true success wasn't just in the media recognition. It was in the tangible changes that were happening every day. People who had once been forgotten were now finding opportunities to contribute, to build, and to thrive. Elon was particularly moved by a moment that occurred during a community gathering in London, one of the first international cities to adopt the program. A young woman, a former homeless shelter resident, spoke at the event. I was living on the streets, just trying to survive, she said, her voice quivering with emotion. I didn't think I had a future. But this program, it didn't just give me a roof. It gave me hope. It gave me purpose. I'm now working as a social worker, helping others who were where I was. I didn't think that was even possible for someone like me. But now, I know anything is. Her words echoed through Elon's mind long after the event was over. This was why he had started this initiative. Not for fame, not for accolades, but to make a real difference in the lives of people who had been cast aside. 1 year after the London launch, Elon stood once again on the rooftop, looking out at the bustling city below. It had been a year full of challenges, triumphs, and lessons learned. The program had expanded to 30 cities worldwide, with hundreds of thousands of lives touched. The road had been long, and the fight for funding, scalability, and political buy-in had been tough. But it was all worth it. Elon was no longer alone in this mission. The communities he had built, both online and offline, had become a movement. People weren't just waiting for the next big thing. They were creating it together. Formerly homeless individuals had become leaders, activists, and business owners. The initiative was growing beyond a program. It was now a model for a new kind of social responsibility, a model that could transcend borders, governments, and industries. In the years to come, the program would continue to evolve. It would face new challenges, but the foundation had been laid. Elon's belief that technology and compassion could go hand in hand had become a guiding principle for many other initiatives across the globe. He thought back to the early days of the program, the nervous energy, the uncertainty. At that time, it had felt like an experiment, a risk. But now, Looking out at the city, at the world, he realized that the real experiment wasn't in the technology. It was in the people. And that, more than anything, was what would ensure the success of the project. As the sun set over the skyline, Elon pulled out his phone and sent a message to Linda. "We did it. But it's just the beginning." Linda's response was immediate. "Always. Let's keep pushing." And with that, Elon Musk looked toward the future with renewed hope and determination. The journey was far from over, but he knew that with each passing day, they were building a future reimagined. A future where everyone, regardless of their past, had a chance to thrive. Reflecting on this journey, what do you think is the most important lesson we can learn from Elon Musk's approach to homelessness and innovation? How can we apply these lessons in our own communities to create lasting change? Share your thoughts and ideas in the comments below.